Welcome back to the Quiet Apothecary. Take a slow breath, let your shoulders soften, and settle in wherever you happen to be tonight. There is nothing here that asks anything of you, and nowhere else you need to be. Tonight we do not walk out into a garden or draw a stool up to a stillroom fire. Tonight we climb a worn stone stair, in the last of the evening, into the long, low room where a monastery kept its books. The shutters are closed against the cold. A single candle burns at the end of a sloping desk, and along the shelves, chained or laid flat in wooden presses, are the manuscripts in which the healing knowledge of 1,000 years was written down and kept. We have come to read 100 remedies from them tonight, one after another slowly, the way a monk might have turned the leaves by candlelight long after the rest of the house had gone to sleep. What draws us to these particular books is not only what is written inside them. It is how very nearly they did not reach us at all. Almost every manuscript we open tonight came through fire or flood, or the breaking up of the house that held it, and survived by the narrowest of margins. Some were scorched at the edges and lived. Some were scraped half away to make room for other writing, and the older words showed faintly through. Some were carried out of a burning abbey in a monk's arms, or hidden in a cellar through a war, or bound into the cover of another book and forgotten for 400 years. Each remedy we name tonight is, in that sense, a small survivor, a piece of practical kindness that came close to vanishing and did not. We will move through them a handful at a time, gathered into gentle chapters, each chapter a single old book with its own quiet story of how it came so close to being lost. There is no need to remember any of this. Let your attention drift in and out as it pleases. We have a great many hours ahead of us, and a great many quiet remedies still to come, and not one of them will mind in the least if you fall asleep partway through and never learn how the rest was saved. Let us begin with the oldest of them, and with a book that opens by defending the very act of healing. The first book on our desk tonight is the Lorsch Pharmacopoeia, written out by the monks of Lorsch Abbey in the Rhine Valley more than 1,200 years ago, in the last years of the 8th century. It is one of the oldest books of medicine to survive from the whole of medieval Europe, and it begins not with a remedy at all, but with a gentle argument. Some devout people in those days held that a Christian ought to trust only in prayer, and that to reach for a herb or a salve was to doubt the will of God. The monk who wrote the opening pages of Lorsch disagreed, quietly and at length. God, he wrote, had filled the fields with healing plants for a reason, and to use them with skill and kindness was itself a work of mercy, pleasing in heaven. Everything that follows, every recipe in the book, rests on that calm first thought, that to heal is a kindness, and a kindness is never wrong. The book survived a long and uncertain history. Lorsch Abbey, once among the greatest houses in the German lands, slowly declined, and its enormous library was broken up and carried away in pieces during the long wars that swept the Rhineland. This one book came through it all, and now rests safely in a library at Bamberg, recognized in our own century as a treasure of the whole world. Let us open it and read the first of its remedies. The first recipe we find is a soft electuary for a winter cough, made of honey and horehound. Horehound is a low, grey, woolly herb with a taste so bitter that it needs the honey to be born at all, and the two were cooked slowly together over a low fire until they thickened into a dark, sticky paste that could be kept for months in a covered pot. A spoonful was taken slowly, allowed to melt against the back of the throat, and it was held to loosen a tight, dry cough and ease the chest through the long damp nights of the cold season. The book gives careful measures, the weight of honey against the handful of dried leaf, in the patient manner of someone who expected the recipe to be followed exactly. And it notes that the paste should be stirred without stopping, lest the honey catch and darken against the pot. What is quietly touching about finding it here is how ordinary it is. Among all the grander and stranger remedies the old books contain, this first one is simply a cough syrup, the same soothing idea a grandmother might reach for still, written down by a monk 1200 years ago and carried through every war and fire since, unchanged. One imagines the infirmary making a great batch of it in autumn, when the horehound was cut and dried, and setting the covered pots along a cool shelf against the certainty of the coughing months to come. Let us turn now to the next recipe on the page. The second remedy is a warmed wine steeped with wormwood and gentian, given for a sour and sluggish stomach. Wormwood is among the most bitter of all the garden herbs, and gentian, a root dug from the mountain meadows, is bitterer still, and the two together made a drink that no one took for pleasure. A few sprigs of the dried herb and a piece of the root were left to steep in a jug of wine set near the hearth, and a small cupful was taken before a meal to wake a tired appetite and settle a stomach that turned against its food. The bitterness itself was thought to be the medicine, rousing the body the way a cold morning rouses the mind, and the wine carried the virtue of the herbs gently through the blood. The monks of Lorsch would have known this remedy from their own table, as much as from their infirmary, for a bitter cup before dinner was as much a part of monastic life as the bell for prayers. There is something restful in imagining it, the same small jug of bitter wine standing warm by the same hearth, night after night, century after century, while the great book that recorded it slept quietly on its shelf, waiting through wars it never saw. Let us turn to the third. The third remedy is a plaster of pine resin and old grease, spread warm on aching joints. The resin was gathered as it wept from the wounded bark of the pine, gummy and golden and sharp with scent, and it was melted together with rendered fat until the two made a soft, sticky salve. Spread thickly on a strip of cloth and bound over a stiff knee or a sore shoulder through the night, it held a gentle warmth against the ache, and its clean, forest smell was thought to draw the soreness out as it cooled. The book counts it among the simplest of its remedies, the kind an infirmary could make from what was always to hand, without sending to any distant market for a costly ingredient. A pine plaster of this sort belonged to a whole family of resin cures that ran through medieval medicine, and it is a reminder that so much of what these monks knew came not from books at all, but from the woods and fields around the walls. The book merely wrote down what the hands already knew, setting into ink a practice that was old before the abbey was ever built. We turn now to the fourth. The fourth is a gargle of sage and vinegar for a raw and swollen throat. A good handful of sage leaves was simmered in vinegar and water until the liquid took on the herb's dark, savory strength, and then it was left to cool to blood warmth before being used. The sufferer tilted the head back and held the sharp, warm liquid at the back of the throat, as long as could be borne, then spat it out, and repeated this through the day as the soreness required. Sage was trusted above almost every other herb for troubles of the mouth and throat, and the vinegar was thought to cut through the thickness that gathered there in a fever, and to leave the throat clean and eased. It is a remedy that has scarcely changed in all the centuries since, and a physician of our own time might recognize it at once. Finding it in a book this old is a small reminder of how much of the oldest medicine was simply sensible, arrived at slowly by people paying careful attention to what eased their neighbors, and then guarded, copied, and carried forward by patient hands that never knew our names. Let us turn to the fifth remedy in the Lorsch book. The fifth is a soft conserve of rose petals cooked into honey, used for a sore mouth and tender, bleeding gums. The petals of the red rose were gathered at their fullest and folded, a few at a time, into warmed honey, and the mixture was left in a covered jar until the honey had drawn out the whole scent and color of the flower. A little was held in the mouth and allowed to melt slowly against the gums, cool and sweet and faintly astringent, and it was thought to firm the flesh and quiet the small pains of the mouth. The same rose honey was given, too, as a gentle comfort to anyone recovering slowly from a long illness, spooned onto bread for someone with little appetite for anything heavier. Of all the remedies in this stern and practical book, the rose conserve is perhaps the gentlest, and it is easy to imagine it made in early summer, when the roses were full and kept back for the darker months, when a little sweetness was worth more than gold. A jar of it, set by, was a small promise made to the winter that even in the hardest weeks there would be something soft and sweet in the infirmary cupboard. We turn now to the sixth. The sixth remedy is a seed drink of fennel, celery, and parsley, given for what the old books called troubles of the water. The 3 seeds were bruised in a mortar to release their oils, and then steeped in hot water into a pale, aromatic tea, faintly sweet from the fennel and green from the celery. And a cupful was taken through the day to encourage the body to pass its water freely, and to ease the dull ache that came when it would not. All 3 plants grew close by the kitchen, being food as much as medicine, and this doubled usefulness made the remedy one of the easiest of all to keep in stock, gathered from the same beds that supplied the pot. The recipe belongs to a whole quiet tradition of seed waters that ran through monastic medicine, gentle drinks made from the kitchen's own store. And it shows how thin the line was in these houses between the cooking pot and the medicine cup. The same monk who seasoned the community's fish on a fast day might carry a handful of the same seed up to the infirmary an hour later for a very different purpose. We turn now to the last remedy from the Lorsch book tonight. The 7th is a syrup of poppy heads, kept for pain and for the long sleepless nights that came with it. The dried seed heads of the field poppy were simmered gently in water and honey until the liquid thickened into a dark, faintly bitter syrup, and this was given by the small spoonful, and only by the small spoonful, to ease a hard, wearing pain, and to bring a measure of rest to someone who had lain awake too long. The book treats it with evident care, for the monks understood well that a remedy strong enough to quiet pain must be given sparingly and watched closely, and they measured it out with a caution that runs all through their writing in the careful, unhurried hand of people who took no risk lightly. It is a fitting last leaf to turn in this first book, this careful, gentle regard for sleep, and for the easing of suffering. The monk who defended healing as a kindness on the opening page would have counted a good night's rest among the truest kindnesses of all, and would, perhaps, have wished us the same tonight. We close the Lorsch book now, softly, and reach for the next. Before we open the next book, let us rest a moment and think of what such a book was made from, for it is easy to forget, holding a book so lightly, how much labor once went into the mere making of the pages. There was no paper in these northern houses for most of the centuries we are wandering through tonight. A book was written on parchment, and parchment was made from the skins of animals, from calf and sheep and goat, prepared by a long and patient craft. The skin was washed and soaked for days in a bath of lime until the hair loosened, and then it was scraped clean on both sides with a curved knife, over and over, and stretched tight on a wooden frame while it dried, and scraped again, and rubbed smooth with pumice and chalk, until at last a rough hide had become a pale, thin, supple leaf that would take ink without blotting. A single large book might use the skins of a whole flock, scores of animals, each one prepared by hand through many days of work, before a single word was ever written. The finest and whitest parchment, the smooth vellum kept for the most precious books, took the most labor of all, and was valued accordingly. Nothing about a book was cheap or quick. Every leaf we turn tonight began as a living creature and passed through many patient hands before it reached the scribe's desk, and that alone made a book a thing of real worth, to be guarded and kept, and, when it was old and worn, mended rather than thrown away. It is worth holding that in mind as we go on, for it explains a great deal about why these books were treasured, and why, even when their words seemed no longer wanted, their strong parchment leaves were so often cut out and used again rather than simply discarded. The parchment was too precious to waste. That very preciousness, as we shall see before the night is done, was both the saving of some books and the undoing of others. For the same value that kept a leaf from being thrown away also tempted a later hand to scrape it clean and write on it anew. Let that slow, patient making settle in your mind, the flocks and the lime, baths and the scraping knives, and let us turn now, gently, to the second book on our desk. The second book on our desk is not really a book of recipes at all, but a drawing, and one of the strangest and most beautiful things to survive from the whole early Middle Ages. It is called the Plan of St Gall, made a little more than 1100 years ago, and it shows, in fine red ink on great sheets of parchment sewn together, the ideal plan of an entire monastery. Every building drawn out and named, down to the beds of the garden and the henhouse and the bakery. And there, close beside the house of the sick and the physician's own rooms, is a small square marked as the Herbularius, the physic garden, its beds ruled out one by one, and each one labeled with the name of the healing plant it was meant to hold. The plan survived by an accident so slight it is hard to believe. Parchment was precious, and a large clean sheet like this one was always in danger of being scraped smooth and used again. This one escaped that fate only because, some 300 years after it was drawn, a monk turned it over and wrote a life of Saint Martin on the back, then folded the whole thing into the shape of a book, so that it was shelved and kept safe in the library at St Gall, where it has remained ever since. Had he reached instead for a knife to scrape it clean, we would have nothing. Let us read the beds of its little garden, one by one. The first bed on the plan is given to the lily, and the white Madonna lily above all. Its great fragrant flowers were prized for their beauty in the cloister, but it was the fat white bulb beneath the soil that the infirmary valued, roasted soft and pounded into a soothing paste, laid warm over a swelling, a boil, or a stubborn burn. The lily poultice was thought to draw and ripen and soften, easing the heat and hurry from an angry place on the skin. The same bulb, boiled in wine, was used on the hard, chapped skin of hands and feet worn by winter work, and the fragrant flowers themselves, steeped in oil, made a soothing balm for the same complaints. That the very first bed of this ideal garden should be given to a flower says a great deal about how these monks saw their physic, as something bound up with beauty and with the care of the whole person, not merely the mending of a body. The lily belonged as much to the altar as to the infirmary, and a plant that served both the eye and the wound sat easily at the head of their garden. We turn to the second bed. The second bed holds the rose, and it earns its place many times over. The petals, dried in the shade to keep their color, were made into cooling washes for tired and inflamed eyes, into gentle astringent gargles, and into the same sweet rose honey we met in the Lorsch book a little while ago. A weak infusion of the petals was given to steady an over-hasty heart, and to lift a low and heavy spirit, and rose water, distilled from great baskets of petals, was splashed on the brow of a feverish patient to bring a moment's coolness and a breath of summer into a close and shuttered sick room. Little went to waste, for even the hips that followed the flower were gathered for their own cooling syrups. The rose appears on this plan and in nearly every book we shall open tonight, and that constancy is part of its quiet strength. A remedy written into so many books, in so many houses, was a remedy that could never quite be lost, however many single copies the fires took. We turn to the third bed. The third bed is given to rosemary, the dark, needled, resinous shrub that loves a sunny wall. Its chief use in the infirmary was for a heavy, aching, clouded head, a pillow stuffed with the dried sprigs, or a warm infusion of the leaves held under the nose was thought to clear and lighten the mind, to sharpen a failing memory, and to lift the dull weight that settled behind the eyes after a long illness or a poor night's sleep. Burned in small bundles, rosemary also sweetened and cleans the air of a room where someone had lain sick for many days, and a sprig laid among the linen kept it fresh. There was an old and gentle belief that rosemary would not grow taller than the height of a man, nor live longer than a man's own span of years, and that where it flourished by the door, it was the woman of the house who ruled. A small piece of garden lore that clung to the plant wherever it was grown. Whether or not any of that was ever believed too seriously, it kept the shrub loved and planted, and a loved plant is a plant that survives. We turn to the fourth bed. The fourth bed holds sage, which the monks trusted so completely that an old saying asked why any man should die while sage grew in his garden. Its grey, pebbled leaves were made into the throat gargle we have already met, into a warm tea for a weary body and a sweating fever, and into a simple daily infusion drunk to steady the nerves and strengthen someone worn thin by care. Rubbed on the teeth, the fresh leaf was thought to clean and firm the gums, and laid among stored linen it kept the moth away, and left the cloth faintly savoury and sweet. Sage sits on the St Gall plan. In the Lorsch book, in the monk's own garden poem we shall read next, and in a dozen books after that. And once again it is exactly this endless repetition, from house to house and page to page, that carried it safely down to us. The commonest herbs, it turns out, were the safest of all, precisely because everyone thought them worth writing down. We turn to the fifth bed. The fifth bed is given to rue, the low blue, green shrub with the bitter scent, planted here as it was planted almost everywhere, close by where it would be needed. Its bruised leaves were pressed onto stings and small wounds. A few drops of its juice were dropped warm into an aching ear, and a weak infusion was taken, carefully and in small amounts, to settle a griping in the stomach. Beyond its medicine, rue carried a long reputation as a plant of protection, set by doorways to turn aside illness and ill will, so that it guarded the house as much as it healed the body, and it was strewn, in some places, before a procession passed. Rue was always handled with a little respect, for its sap could raise a rash on bare skin in strong sun, a lesson every infirmary learned early, usually the hard way. That small hazard did nothing to lower its standing, and it kept its honored place in the physic garden through all the centuries, a herb both trusted and slightly feared. We turn to the sixth bed. The sixth bed on the plan holds the water mints and the watercress that liked the damp corner of the garden, close to where the water ran. The cress, eaten fresh, was valued as a spring tonic, a green and peppery cleanser for a body grown heavy and sluggish through a long winter of salted meat and stored roots, and it was thought to clear the blood and brighten the eye. The mint beside it was made into a warm, sweet tea that eased a churning stomach, calmed the wind after a heavy meal, and freshened a stale mouth, and its scent alone, crushed between the fingers, was held to lift a low spirit. Both plants asked only for wet ground and a little shade, and gave back a great deal, and their place on this careful plan shows how thoughtfully the whole garden was laid out, each plant set where it would thrive rather than where it merely looked well. The monk who drew this plan understood his ground. We turn now to the seventh and last bed we shall read from the St Gall plan tonight. The seventh bed is given to cumin, the small aromatic seed brought from warmer lands and grown, where it could be coaxed to ripen, for the belly and the wind. The bruised seeds were steeped into a warm drink for a clicky, griping stomach, given to ease the painful trapped wind that followed a poor meal, and folded, too, into breads and dishes where they did double duty, as flavour and as medicine. That cumin appears on a garden plan drawn in the cold German uplands, where it can barely have ripened at all, shows how much these monks longed to grow every useful plant they had read of, whether the climate favoured it or not, and how far their reading ranged beyond their own weather. And so we fold the great plan closed again, gently, the way that long ago monk folded it into a book and saved it without ever knowing what he had done. Its little garden, ruled out in red ink and never, perhaps, planted exactly as drawn, has outlasted every real garden of its age. Let us leave it now and reach for the next book, which is smaller and warmer, and written by a young monk about a garden that was truly his own. Before we open it, let us rest a moment on the pictures that so many of these books carried, the painted plants set beside the words, for they are among the loveliest and the most curious things in all the old herbals. A remedy is of little use if the reader cannot tell which plant it means. And so from the earliest times the makers of herbals tried to draw the plants as well as name them, painting each one on the page beside its uses, so that a gatherer might carry the picture in mind out to the hedgerow and know the true herb from its dangerous look alike. In the finest books these paintings were things of real beauty, the leaf and flower and root all shown, the colours laid on with care, so that turning the pages was like walking slowly through a garden pressed flat and kept forever. Yet there is a gentle comedy hidden in them too, for many of these pictures were copied not from the living plant, but from an older picture, and that from an older still, back and back through the centuries, each copyist faithfully reproducing what lay before him without ever going out to check it against the growing herb. And so, little by little, the plants in the books drifted away from the plants in the fields. A leaf simplified here, a root misremembered there, a flower given the wrong number of petals, until some of the paintings in the latest copies showed plants that could not be found growing anywhere on earth. Strange and dreamlike things born of nothing, but centuries of careful copying of copies. There is something oddly moving in that, in the picture of a scribe painting, with great care and no complaint, a flower he had never seen, trusting the book before him as the book before him had trusted the one before it. He was doing his honest work, keeping the chain unbroken, and if the plant slowly changed along the way, that was the price of a knowledge carried by hand across 1,000 years. The wonder is not that some pictures went astray, but that so many stayed true. True enough that a gatherer could still take the book to the field and come home with the right herb in the basket. And it reminds us, as so much tonight reminds us, how fragile and how human this whole inheritance was, kept alive not by any perfect machine, but by tired hands in cold rooms doing their patient best, getting most of it right and some of it charmingly wrong, and passing the whole of it faithfully on. The painted gardens they left us are the more precious, not less, for those small and honest errors, which are the very fingerprints of the hands that made them. Let those bright painted plants settle in your mind now, the true ones and the dreamed ones alike, and let us turn to the little garden book. The third book is a slim one, and the warmest we shall open all night. It is a poem written by a young monk named Walahfrid Strabo, who lived on the green island monastery of Reichenau, out in the calm of Lake Constance, some 1,200 years ago. He called it simply the Hortulus, the little garden, and it is not a list of cures at all, but an affectionate account of his own small plot, the beds he dug and weeded and watered by hand, the nettles he cleared, the mole that undermined his work, and the plants he loved as he tended them. He dedicated it to his old teacher, and through it, more than through any grand pharmacopoeia, we can almost kneel down beside a real monk in a real garden and see what grew there. Reichenau, once a lamp of learning for the whole of Europe, was dissolved in a later age, and its great library was carried off and scattered among distant collections, so that this tender little poem too came close to being lost among the wreckage of a vanished house. Walahfrid opens. As it happens with sage and then with rue, the very plants we just saw ruled out on the St Gall plan. And that echo is itself part of tonight's quiet lesson, that the truest remedies were written again and again, in book after book, by hand after hand. Let us pass over those too, having met them already, and go to the plants that were most his own. The first we come to is southernwood, which Walahfrid grew for its feathery, silver, green foliage and its sharp, faintly bitter scent. In the poem he speaks of its strength against the small troubles of the body, and it was long given, in careful and modest doses, for worms in children, steeped into a weak and bitter tea. Its crushed leaves, rubbed on the skin, were held to keep off the biting insects of the long summer evenings, and small dried bundles of it were hung among stored woolens to turn away the moth. Some old books add that its ash, worked into an ointment, was rubbed where the beard was slow to come, a use that gave the plant one of its country names, lad's love. There is a homely tenderness in the way Walahfrid writes of such plants, not as a physician cataloguing their powers, but as a gardener fond of the things he grows. He knew the feel of the southern wood between his fingers, and the way its scent rose when he brushed past it in the dusk, and that closeness comes through the Latin even now, across all the centuries between. We turn now to the wormwood. Wormwood grew in Walahfrid's garden, as it grew in nearly every monastic plot, and he does not pretend to enjoy it. He calls it bitter plainly, and yet he gives it an honored place, for that very bitterness was its virtue. A wreath of the fresh grey foliage was bound about an aching, feverish head to cool and quiet it, and a weak infusion of the leaves was taken for a stomach that had grown sour and slow. The dried herb, laid among books and clothes, kept out the moth and the small crawling things, and a sprig of it steeped in wine made the bitter tonic we met in the very first book of the night. It is one of the plants that binds the whole evening together, appearing in the Lorsch book, in this little poem, and in a dozen manuscripts still to come. Wherever monks kept a garden, they kept a corner of wormwood, and wherever they kept wormwood, they wrote of it. And so the plant and its uses passed down to us many times over, in many different hands. We turn now to the horehound. Horehound follows in the poem, and Walahfrid gives it a curious and memorable praise. It tastes foul, he admits, but he urges the reader to drink it down regardless, for he held it good against a cough and, more strikingly, good against poison taken by treachery. The grey, wrinkled leaves were simmered with honey into the same soothing cough electuary we have already seen, or steeped alone into a bitter tea for a tight and rattling chest. That older belief in it as a guard against poison lingered for many centuries, and a cup of horehound was sometimes pressed on a traveller who feared he had been ill-served at an untrustworthy table. There is something very human in a poet praising a remedy while frankly admitting how nasty it is to take. Walahfrid does not flatter his herbs. He tells the truth about them, the good and the bitter alike, and that honesty is part of why the little poem has kept its readers' affection for so long. We turn now to the fennel. Fennel grew tall and feathery at the back of the beds, and Walahfrid valued it highly, above all for the eyes. A wash made from its seeds steeped in water was dropped, cooled, onto tired and dimming eyes to clear and brighten them, and there was an old belief, repeated in book after book, that the serpent rubbed its eyes against the fennel to renew its own sight in spring. The bruised seed was also taken in a warm drink for a cough, and for a stomach clogged and heavy after too rich a meal, and the sweet, aniseed taste of it made it one of the few remedies that needed no honey to be born. Fennel is another of the herbs that walk through nearly every book of the night. Useful, easy to grow, and pleasant enough to take. And once again, that very commonness was its safeguard. The rare and the strange were the remedies most easily lost. The plain and the well-loved were copied everywhere, and so survived. We turn now to the chervil. Chervil was one of the first green things of Walahfrid spring, a delicate, ferny herb with a light and pleasant taste, and he grew it as gladly for the pot as for the medicine chest. Eaten fresh in the early year, it was thought to cleanse and freshen a body grown heavy through the winter, and a warm infusion of it was given to settle the stomach and the bowels. Some old books add that its bruised leaf, laid on a bruise or a swelling, would gently ease and disperse it, and that a wash of chervil brightened a tired and sallow complexion. It is a slight, modest plant, easily overlooked, and it is characteristic of this gentle poem that it should find room for such a herb alongside the grander cures. Walahfrid loved his garden whole, the small useful things as much as the famous ones, and that even-handed affection is a large part of the little book's charm. We turn now to the agrimony. Agrimony earns one of the poem's most personal passages, for Walahfrid writes that he knows its power from his own body. He had been cut, he tells us, and the herb, bruised and laid on the wound, had staunched and healed it, and so he sets down its virtue not from any book but from experience. A tall, slender plant with small yellow flowers up its stem, agrimony was long trusted for wounds and cuts, its leaves crushed into a poultice or steeped into a wash, and its bitter, astringent tea was also given for troubles of the liver and a sluggish digestion. That small, direct testimony, a monk telling us plainly that a herb had healed his own cut, is worth more than pages of borrowed authority. It reminds us that behind all these careful manuscripts lay real hands, really hurt and really mended, and that the knowledge in them was paid for, over and over, in small ordinary pains. We turn now to the close of the little poem. Walahfrid ends his garden not with a cure, but with two flowers, the lily and the rose, and lifts them gently above all the rest. The rose he sets for the blood of the martyrs, and the lily for the brightness of pure faith. And though he writes of them as a monk contemplating holy things, both flowers were also true remedies. As we have already seen, the lily's bulb drawing a swelling, and the rose's petals cooling a fever and easing a sore mouth. So the poem closes where beauty and healing meet, which is where this whole tradition of monastic physic was always most at home. We fold the little garden book shut with real reluctance, for it is the friendliest thing on our desk. That it survived at all, when so much of Reichenau's library did not, is a small mercy, and it lets a single fond young gardener speak to us still, across an ocean of years, about the plants he loved and tended by hand. Let us set it aside now, gently, and reach for a book of a very different temper, one made not to be loved, but to be learned by heart. Let us pause once more before we open it, and think this time of the writing itself, of the ink and the pen, and the slow setting down of the words. The ink most often used in these books was made from the small hard galls that grow on oak trees, where a wasp has laid its egg and the tree has swelled around it. The galls were gathered and crushed and steeped, and their dark bitter liquor was mixed with a little iron and thickened with gum, and from this came a rich brown, black ink that bit gently into the parchment and held its color for 1,000 years and more. The very words we read tonight are written in the crushed galls of oak trees that grew and fell before any of us were born. The pen was a feather, most often from the wing of a goose, its hollow shaft cut to a fine split nib with a small sharp knife, and trimmed again and again as it wore, so that a scribe worked always with his knife beside his pen, sharpening as he went. He wrote slowly, forming each letter with care, and a good day's work might be only a few pages, for a slip of the hand could spoil a leaf that had cost a flock of sheep to make. And where a book was to be made beautiful as well as useful, other colors joined the brown, black ink, blue ground from precious stone, green from copper, red from earth or from a small insect, and, in the grandest books of all, gold, laid on in thin leaves and burnished until it shone like a little window of light on the page. To picture it truly is to slow the mind almost to stillness. A single monk or nun at a sloping desk in the thin light of a shuttered room, forming letter after letter with a trimmed feather, dipped in the liquor of oak galls, hour after hour, day after day, through a whole turning year, so that one book might come into being. There was no hurry in it, and no way to hurry it. The work went at the pace of the hand, and the hand went at the pace of care. It is that unhurried care, more than anything, that these books carry down to us, folded invisibly into every line. Whatever the remedies say, the pages themselves say something quieter underneath. That a human being once thought this knowledge worth the whole slow labor of setting it down by hand, letter by letter, against the certainty of their own forgetting. Let that stillness gather around you now, the sharpened feather and the dark oak ink, and the shining thread of gold, and let us turn to the fourth book on our desk. The fourth book is the Herbal of Macer, called De Veribus Herbarum, the Powers of Herbs, a long poem in stately Latin verse that names some 80 plants and sets down the virtues of each in turn. It was written, most likely, a little under 1,000 years ago, and it became one of the most widely used teaching books in all of medieval medicine. Students learned its verses by heart, reciting them until the powers of the herbs were fixed in memory as firmly as a prayer, and it was copied out again and again in monastery and university alike. And here is the quiet marvel of it. No single copy of Macer was ever safe. Fire took some, damp took others, and neglect took more. Yet, because the poem lived inside so many memories and was set down by so many hands, no fire could reach all of it at once, and it came down to us whole precisely because it was everywhere. Let us read a few of the herbs it taught the young to remember. The poem opens, as many herbals do, with mugwort, which it names the mother of herbs and sets at the head of them all. A tall, grey-backed plant of the roadside and the waste ground. Mugwort was long trusted for the troubles of women and for the pains of a weary body. Its most charming use lay in the belief that a traveller who bound a little of it about the feet, or tucked it into a shoe, would walk all day without tiring. A piece of wayfarer's lore repeated in book after book, steeped into a warm and bitter tea. It was also given to settle the stomach and to ease a restless night. That the great teaching poem should begin with a common weed of the wayside says much about this whole tradition, which found its most trusted medicines not in far countries but underfoot, along the very paths its readers walked each day. The mother of herbs grew, quite literally, in the ditch outside the door. We turn now to the plantain. Plantain follows close behind, and Macer heaps virtue upon it. The broad, ribbed leaves of this humble plant of the path and the trodden ground were among the most reached for of all wound herbs, bruised and bound over a cut, a graze, or the bite of a dog or a stinging thing, to cool the heat and stop the bleeding. Its juice, pressed out and taken in a little wine or water, was given for the fluxes and looseness of the bowels, and a wash of it was dropped onto sore and weeping eyes. So sure and so general were its powers thought to be that it earned, in the Old English tongue, the name waybread, the bread of the way, the plant that fed the traveller's hurts. Plantain is one more of our recurring friends, met in this verse, and soon to be met again in older books still, and each time under a slightly different name, and for a slightly different hurt. Its very plainness kept it safe, for a plant that grows in every path is a plant that no fire can burn out of the world. We turn now to the Botany. Botany receives from Macer, as from nearly every other herbal, a long and glowing catalogue of powers, so long that the old books could hardly agree where to stop. It was held good for the head and for headache, good for the stomach, good for a bite or a wound, good drunk against poison, and good simply worn about the person as a guard against harm. The dark, handsome leaves were dried and steeped into a daily tea taken to strengthen and steady both the body and the spirit, and there was a proverb, current for centuries, that a man should sell his coat and buy Botany. We shall meet Botany again tonight, more than once, for it was perhaps the single most praised herb in all of monastic medicine, and no book of remedies felt complete without it. That constant repetition, from manuscript to manuscript, is the very reason its long reputation reached us unbroken, when the reputations of rarer plants faded and were lost. We turn now to the vervain. Vervain was reckoned among the most sacred of all the herbs, trailing a long history of reverence from far before the monks ever wrote of it, and Macer gives it powers to match. It was gathered, in older custom, with particular ceremony, and worn or hung about the house as a guard against harm and ill will. As a medicine it was steeped into a wash for wounds and sores, taken in a bitter tea for fevers and for troubles of the liver, and used in gargles for a sore mouth and throat. A sprig of it, tied at the neck, was thought to ease a long-standing headache. Half medicine and half blessing, vervain sat easily in the hands of monks who saw no sharp line between the healing of the body and the care of the soul. To them a herb that eased a wound and turned aside misfortune was doing one single work, not two, and the poem sets down both its powers without the least sense of contradiction. We turn now to the celandine. Greater celandine, a plant of shady banks and old walls, carries a bright orange juice in its broken stems, and Macer, like the herbals before him, valued it above all for the eyes. The juice, much diluted and used with great care, was dropped onto a dimming eye to clear and brighten it. And there was a lovely old belief that the swallow used the plant to restore the sight of its blinded young, which is how, the story went, people first learned its power. The same sharp juice was dabbed, undiluted, onto warts to wear them away. It is a plant to be handled with respect, for its juice is strong, and the old books that praised it also counseled caution in its use. That balance, of high praise tempered by careful warning, runs all through this careful literature, whose writers knew that the line between a remedy and a harm often lay only in the dose. We turn now to the pennyroyal. Pennyroyal, a low creeping mint with a sharp and pungent scent, was grown in every physic garden and named warmly by Macer. Its chief uses lay with the chest and the stomach, a warm infusion of it taken for a cough, and for the griping wind that followed a poor meal, and it was long carried by travellers, who dropped a sprig into doubtful water in the belief that it made the water safer and sweeter to drink. Bruised and rubbed on the skin, it was thought, like so many of the aromatic mints, to keep off the biting insects of summer. Pennyroyal was a plant handled with knowledge and care by those who used it well, and the old Herbal's name it plainly among the useful mints of the garden. Its pungent scent, released at a touch, must have been one of the familiar smells of any monastic physic bed, rising underfoot as the infirmary walked his rows. We turn now to the last of Macer's herbs tonight. Garlic closes our reading of the teaching poem, and Macer gives it the honor it has always held among plain and practical people. It was reckoned a guard against poison and a cleanser of the blood, taken for worms and for a weak and windy stomach, and pounded into poultices laid on stubborn sores. So trusted was it against every kind of ill that it earned the affectionate name of the theriac of the poor, theriac being the grandest and most costly compound medicine of the age, which we shall meet in its own right before the night is done. Garlic was the countryman's answer to that great and expensive cure, growing in any patch of ground for nothing at all. It is fitting to end the teaching poem with so humble and so universal a plant, for that was the whole genius of Macer, to fix in the memory of the young the powers of the herbs that grew all around them, needing no distant market and no great purse. We close the poem now, its verses still faintly ringing, and reach across the desk for a book that came from far to the south, out of a famous school beside the sea. Before we open this next book, let us rest a moment on the long road it travelled to reach the desk, for the learning in it had come a very great way indeed. The knowledge gathered in these southern books was not born in the monasteries of Europe. Much of it was far older, first written down in Greek by physicians of the ancient world, then carried east and preserved, and enlarged by the scholars of the Arab lands, when the West had half forgotten it, translated there into Arabic, studied, corrected, added to, and only long afterward carried back west again and turned into Latin, so that the physicians of the northern schools might read it. A single remedy might have passed through 3 or 4 languages, and 1,000 years and half the width of the known world, before it settled at last onto a European page. There is something wonderful and steadying in that thought, of knowledge as a thing handed patiently from hand to hand across centuries and across tongues, each keeper adding a little and losing a little, none of them owning it, all of them merely holding it for a while and passing it on. A cure first written by a Greek by the shore of the Aegean might be read, 1,000 years later, by a monk in a cold cloister who had never seen the sea, in words that had crossed deserts and mountains and many strange alphabets to reach him, and he in turn would copy it and pass it on to hands he would never see. That long chain could be broken at any link, and often was. A single burning library, a single war, a single generation that stopped carrying, could snap the thread and lose forever what 100 generations had carried. And yet, again and again, the thread held, saved by some patient soul in some quiet room, who troubled to copy out the old words one more time before the copy they had went to dust. Everything on our desk tonight is here, because that patient copying never quite stopped. It is easy in a hurried age to imagine that knowledge simply accumulates, that once a thing is known it stays known. These books tell a different and more fragile story of a knowledge that had to be actively kept, recopied, retranslated, remembered in every single generation, or else quietly lost. What survived? Survived because someone cared enough to carry it one stage further on its endless journey. Let that long road unwind slowly in your mind now, from the ancient shore to the cold cloister, and let us turn to the book that carried so much of it north. The fifth book on our desk came north from the warm coast of Italy, out of the famous medical school at Salerno, where for a while the finest physicians in Europe gathered beside the sea. It is called the Circa Instans, from the two Latin words it opens with, and it is a patient catalogue of simples, of single healing substances, taken one at a time, each described in turn with its nature and its uses. Where the northern herbals gave us the plants of the ditch and the dooryard, this southern book opens a door onto the wider world, onto resins and barks and roots carried by ship from far countries, the costly medicines of the merchant's chest. Salerno itself, once the brightest lamp of healing in the whole of the West, faded slowly over the centuries as newer schools rose, and it was at last formally closed by a decree of Napoleon in the early years of the 19th century. Its long life ended, and its manuscripts scattered among distant libraries. What it taught, though, was copied into 100 later books before the end came, and so survived the closing of its doors. Let us read a few of its simples. The first we come to is aloe, the bitter dried juice of a fleshy desert plant, boiled down until it set hard and dark and could be broken into pieces and traded across half the world. In small, carefully measured doses, it was among the most trusted of all the gentle purgers, taken to cleanse a clogged and sluggish body, and it was reckoned to strengthen the stomach even as it worked. Beyond that inner use, the same bitter substance, dissolved and dabbed onto a wound or an ulcer that would not close, was thought to cleanse it and hurry its healing. It appears in the great compound medicines we shall meet in the next book, lending them its bitterness and its cleansing power. The book sets down aloe's nature with the care of a merchant who knows exactly what he handles, for a substance carried so far and sold so dear had to be judged truly, its good sort told from its poor. That careful weighing of quality runs all through this southern learning, which treated medicine as both a healing art and a serious trade. We turn now to the frankincense. Frankincense, which the old books call olibanum, is the pale, fragrant resin that weeps from a desert tree and hardens into golden tears. Better known to most for its rising smoke in worship than for its place in the medicine chest. Yet the Circa Instans gives it a solid physic, powdered fine and sprinkled onto a wound. It was held to staunch the bleeding and knit the flesh, and worked into a plaster with wax and oil. It was laid on aching and swollen places to soothe them. Its fragrant smoke, breathed in, was thought to clear a heavy head, and to cleanse the close air of a sick room of whatever unseen corruption was believed to linger there. There is a quiet fittingness in a substance so bound up with prayer, being also a healer of the body, and it would not have seemed strange in the least to the monks who read of it. To them the fragrance rising from the altar and the same fragrance easing a wound were two faces of one gift. We turn now to the mirror. Myrrh is frankincense's darker companion, another fragrant resin of the desert lands, bitterer in scent and reddish-brown where the other is pale. The book prizes it as a great preserver and cleanser. Dissolved into a wash, it was used on foul and slow, healing sores to sweeten and mend them, and a little of it, held in the mouth, was thought to firm the gums and freshen a sour breath. It was reckoned, too, among the remedies of women, and it lent its preserving power to the embalming of the dead, a use so ancient that it reached back long before any of these books were written. Frankincense and myrrh together carried, for every reader of the age, an echo of the gifts brought to the manga, and to find them here, set down soberly among purges and plasters, is a reminder of how tightly the sacred and the practical were woven in this world. The same two resins served the altar, the sickbed, and the grave. We turn now to the ginger. Ginger, the knotted root brought from the Far East, was among the most valued of all the warming medicines, for the physicians of this school judged every substance by its heat or cold, its dryness or moisture, and ginger they reckoned hot and dry in a high degree. A cold, weak, and windy stomach was thought to be exactly what its heat could mend, and a little of the powdered root, taken in a warm drink or folded into a sweet electuary, was given to kindle the digestion and drive out the griping wind. It was carried, too, as a comfort against the chill of a hard journey, warming the traveller from within. Ginger was costly, brought so far by so many hands, and its presence in a household store was a quiet sign of some small wealth. Yet its warmth was so prized that even the poorer sick were dosed with it when it could be had, a pinch begged or bought against a serious cold of the stomach. We turn now to the cinnamon. Cinnamon, the sweet inner bark of a far eastern tree, peeled and dried into fragrant quills, was among the most precious substances in the whole book, reckoned both a fine flavor and a noble medicine. Warm and comforting in its nature, it was given to strengthen a weak stomach and a faint heart, folded into cordial electuaries, meant to lift and steady someone worn low by long illness. A little of it, steeped in warm wine, made a comforting drink for a chill, and its fragrance alone was thought to cheer and revive a heavy spirit. So dear was cinnamon that its use marked a remedy as one for the wealthy, or for the gravest need, and a physician who reached for it did so knowing its cost. That such far carried treasures should be catalogued in the same calm voice as the humblest garden herb is the particular gift of this book, which set the whole known world of medicine, near and far, into one patient order. We turn now to the licorice. Licorice, the sweet root of a modest plant, was among the gentlest and best loved of all the simples, and the book values it above all for the chest and the throat. Boiled slowly in water, the root gave up a dark, sweet juice that was sipped warm to soothe a raw and rasping cough, to ease a tight chest, and to comfort a throat worn sore by long coughing. Its natural sweetness made it a welcome medicine where so many were bitter, and it was often added to harsher remedies, simply to make them bearable to take. There is a kindness in a remedy that heals and comforts at once, asking nothing of the sufferer, but to sip something sweet, and licorice earned a lasting affection for exactly that. It sits in book after book across the centuries, always for the same gentle purpose, one more of the plain and well-loved remedies that were never in danger of being lost. We turn now to the last of the simples tonight. Mastic is the pale resin of a small tree that grows, most famously, on a single Greek island, weeping in fragrant tears that were gathered by hand and traded across the sea. The book sets it down for the stomach above all, a little of it chewed slowly to sweeten the breath and to settle a queasy, unsettled belly, and worked into plasters to strengthen and warm a weak digestion from without. Chewed, too, it was thought to clean and firm the gums and the teeth, and its clean, faintly pine-like scent made it a pleasant medicine to hold in the mouth. With the mastic we close the book of simples, this patient roll, call of the world's single healing substances, gathered from garden and desert and distant shore alike. The school that made it is long silent, its lecture rooms empty for 200 years, yet its careful learning lives on, copied forward in time and out of danger before the doors were shut. Let us set it beside its neighbours now, and open a book from the very same school that taught not single substances, but the great compounded cures, mixed of many things at once. Let us pause again for a breath and think of the room where such compounds were actually made, for a book of recipes is only half the story, and behind it always stood the quiet, patient work of the hands. Somewhere in every great monastery, near the infirmary, was a room given over to the making of medicines, and it had a smell all its own, of dried herbs and honey and beeswax, of vinegar and wine, of resin and spice, layered up over years until the very walls seemed to hold it. Bunches of dried herbs hung from the beams. Rows of pots and jars, labelled or known by long habit, stood along the shelves, and at the heart of it stood the mortar, the heavy stone or bronze bowl in which the herbs and roots and gums were pounded slowly with a pestle into powders and pastes. The pounding was long, unhurried work. A hard root might take an hour of patient grinding to reduce to powder, the pestle turning and pressing, while the maker's mind wandered where it would. The honey was warmed, the wax was melted, the wine was measured. The whole slow business of turning a written recipe into an actual salve or syrup or electuary, carried out step by careful step, often by someone who could not read the recipe at all, but knew it by heart, having made it 100 times before. Much of the true knowledge of these medicines lived not on the page, but in such hands, in the feel of a paste rightly thickened, the color of a salve properly greened, the moment a syrup was cooked just enough, and no more. There is a deep and settling calm in imagining that room and that work, the low fire, the warm smell, the slow rhythm of the pestle in the bowl, the light fading at the window, while a single patient soul ground a root to powder for the sake of someone lying sick nearby. It was not exciting work, and it was never finished, for the sick were always with them, and the pots always needed refilling. It was simply care, made steady and daily and unremarkable, the quiet engine beneath all the grand books. And it is worth remembering that the books themselves depended on that room, for a recipe unmade is only words, and a knowledge that lived only on the page and never in the hands would have been a fragile thing indeed. It was the constant making, as much as the constant copying, that kept these remedies truly alive, each generation of hands learning the feel of them anew from the generation before. Let that warm, herb-scented quiet settle around you now, the mortar and the low fire, and let us turn to the book of the great compounded cures. The sixth book is the Antidotarium of Nicholas, the standard book of compound medicines that came out of Salerno alongside the Circa Instans. And where that book named single substances, this one gives the recipes that blended them, sometimes dozens at a time, into the grand electuaries and syrups and plasters of the age. It set down, for the first time in a way all could follow, the exact weights and measures of each compound, so that a remedy mixed in one town would match the same remedy mixed in another, and for that reason it became the pattern book of apothecaries across Europe. In time, newer formularies replaced it, and old copies were unbound, scraped, or cut up for other uses, so that this once indispensable book survives mostly because so much of it was copied into the very books that succeeded it. Let us read a few of its great compounds. The first and grandest is theriac, the most famous compound medicine in the whole of the Old World, a dark and treacly electuary blended of scores of ingredients, herbs and spices and resins and more, pounded together with honey and left to mature for years before it was thought ready. It was held to be a guard against every poison and a comfort in every grave sickness and the making of it. In later centuries, became a solemn public event, the ingredients displayed and weighed before witnesses so that all might trust the finished cure. A very little of it was given in the direst need, dissolved in warm wine, in the belief that it could turn aside even the worst of fevers. No single remedy better captures the ambition of this learning, which dreamed of one great medicine equal to any ill. Whether theriac ever did all that was claimed of it, the care and reverence poured into its making tell us how deeply people longed for such a thing, and how much comfort the mere having of it gave. We turn now to a far humbler compound. Oxymel is as plain as theriac is grand, being simply honey and vinegar boiled gently together into a sharp, sweet, sour syrup, sometimes strengthened with the juice of squills or a few warming seeds. The book gives it for the chest above all, a spoonful taken to loosen and bring up the thick phlegm of a heavy cold and to ease a rattling cough. Its sharp sweetness was thought to cut through and thin whatever lay clogged and stubborn within, and it was gentle enough to be given freely and often, even to the weak. There is a pleasing balance in setting the mightiest medicine of the age and one of the simplest side by side on the same few pages, and the book does so without the least sense that one is grander than the other. A remedy was judged by whether it worked, not by the cost of its making. We turn now to the Rose Electuary. The Rosata Novella, the new rose confection, was one of Nicholas's own gentle compounds, built around the petals of the red rose and blended with sugar and a few warming spices into a fragrant, comforting paste. It was given to strengthen a weak stomach and to steady a faint and fluttering heart, a little taken slowly for its cordial warmth and its sweet, roseate scent. Like so many of the rose remedies we have already met, it belonged as much to comfort as to cure, offered to someone worn thin by illness, as much to hearten as to heal. Here again is the rose, met now for the third or fourth time tonight, in yet another book and yet another form, and here again is the quiet reason so many rose remedies reached us whole. A flower written into every book, north and south, garden and school, could never be forgotten while a single one of those books survived. We turn now to the gentle purge. The Diacatholicon was a mild and general purge, its very name suggesting a remedy suited to all, and it blended the gentlest of the cleansing drugs, senna and rhubarb, and tamarind and sweet cassia among them, into a soft electuary that worked kindly and without violence. It was reached for when a stronger purge was thought too harsh, given to the old, the weak, and the young, and to anyone whose long sickness had left them too frail for a rougher remedy. The book prized it precisely for its mildness, an important virtue in an age when medicine could too easily do more harm than the illness. That such care was taken to have a gentle remedy ready for the frail speaks well of the physicians who wrote and used this book. They knew the strength of their own medicines, and they knew that gentleness, rightly timed, was itself a kind of skill. We turn now to the holy bitter. The Hara Picra, whose Greek name means the holy bitter, was an old and much copied compound built upon a low and warmed with a little cinnamon, mastic, and other spices, blended into a bitter powder or electuary. It was given as a cleansing remedy for the stomach and the head, taken in small amounts to clear away what was thought to lie heavy and corrupt within, and it kept its place in the pharmacies of Europe for many hundreds of years, long after much else in the book had been forgotten. Its bitterness was reckoned part of its virtue, rousing and cleansing at once. That a single recipe should pass, almost unchanged, through so many centuries and so many hands is itself a small wonder, and a reminder that the best of these compounds earned their long lives honestly by being reached for again and again. We turn now to the last of the compounds tonight. The book closes our reading with the cooling drinks, the barley water and the julep, the gentle bases on which so much else was built. Barley water was made by simmering barley long and slow until the water turned soft and milky and faintly sweet, and it was given to every fevered and weakened patient as a cooling, nourishing drink that troubled the stomach not at all. The julep was simpler still, a clear sweet syrup of sugar or honey, scented with rose or violet water, a soothing thing in itself and the pleasant vehicle in which bitterer medicines were carried down. With these mild and cooling drinks we close the book of compounds, and it is fitting to end its grand catalogue not with Theriac's dozens of ingredients, but with a cup of barley water, the plainest comfort of every sick room. Let us set the Salerno books aside now, and turn to a monk who carried the learning of the East across the sea and into a great abbey on a mountain. Before we open the next book, let us rest a moment on a simple question we have not yet asked, which is why it should have been the monasteries, of all places, that kept so much of this healing knowledge alive. The answer lies partly in the quiet that a monastery held, an island of order and continuity in centuries that were often anything but orderly. While kingdoms rose and fell and towns burned, and the roads grew unsafe, the great houses went on, generation after generation, keeping their libraries and their gardens and their patient daily round. One of the few places in the whole broken landscape where a book might sit safely on a shelf for 300 years, and a garden be tended without a break. And the answer lies partly in duty, for the old rule that governed these houses commanded, in plain and gentle words, that the care of the sick be placed before and above all else, that the ailing be served as if they were the very embodiment of something holy. A monastery was bound to keep an infirmary, to receive the sick who came to its gate, to tend the traveller who fell ill on the road, and to send no suffering soul away untended. That duty made medicine not a sideline, but a sacred obligation, and it gave the monks every reason to gather, to copy, and to guard whatever healing knowledge they could find. So the two came together, the safe, quiet room where a book could survive, and the holy duty that made such books worth keeping. And out of that meeting grew the whole tradition we are wandering through tonight. The monastery was, for many centuries, the memory of medicine, the place where the scattered learning of a broken world was gathered up and held safe until a steadier age could receive it again. It was not a perfect keeper. Much was lost even so, but without it, immeasurably more would have vanished. There is a great restfulness in the thought of those quiet houses, holding their patient vigil over knowledge through the long, uneasy centuries, asking nothing of the world but to be left to their prayers and their gardens and their books. They kept the flame low, but they kept it, and when at last the world was ready to read again, the flame was still there to be shared. Let that quiet steadiness settle in your mind now, the long unbroken vigil of the cloister, and let us turn to a monk who added greatly to what it kept. The seventh book, or rather the whole shelf of books, is the work of a single remarkable monk named Constantine, who is remembered as Constantine the African, for he came out of North Africa across the sea before he ever took his vows. In an earlier life, he had been a traveler and a merchant, and somewhere in his journeys, he had gathered up the great medical learning of the Arab world, the writings that had themselves gathered up and carried forward the older wisdom of Greece. Late in life, he came to the mountain abbey of Monte Cassino, the mother house of all Benedictine monasteries, took the habit and set himself to translate that vast learning into Latin, so that the physicians of the West might read what had been closed to them for centuries. Few libraries in the world have been so often destroyed as the one he wrote for. Monte Cassino was sacked by the Lombards, burned by the Saracens, thrown down by earthquake, and in the last great war reduced to rubble by bombs. Yet, before that final ruin, its manuscripts had been carried down the mountain to safety, and so the learning Constantine gathered lived through every fall of the house that held it. Let us read a few of the medicines his books carried north. The first is senna, the dried leaf and pod of a small desert shrub, which Constantine's translations helped make known across Europe as one of the kindest of all the purges, where the older Western cleansers could gripe and trouble a weak body. Senna worked gently and surely, steeped into a warm infusion, sometimes with a little ginger or fennel to soften its action further. It was reached for to cleanse a clogged and heavy system without violence, and its mildness earned it a lasting place in every apothecary's store. There is a quiet significance in a North African leaf, carried into a mountain monastery in Italy and written into Latin by a converted merchant, ending its long journey in the medicine cupboards of cold northern cloisters. The knowledge that reached those cloisters had crossed deserts and seas and languages to arrive, and it survived every one of those crossings because patient hands kept copying it forward. We turn now to the camphor. Camphor is a white, crystalline substance won from the wood of a far eastern tree, sharp and cooling in its scent, and it entered Western medicine largely through these same translated books. The physicians reckoned it cold in its nature, and so a fitting remedy against the heat of fevers and the fluttering of an overwrought heart, given in tiny amounts, for its strength was great. Its clean, penetrating fragrance was also breathed in to clear a heavy head, and it was carried, like so many fragrant things, in the belief that its scent could guard against the corrupt airs thought to spread sickness. So precious and so potent was camphor that it was handled by grains rather than spoonfuls, and its very costliness marked it as a medicine of the wealthy and the gravely ill. That it was known in the West at all was owed to the long chain of scholars, Arab and then Latin, who had written of it, each passing the knowledge to the next before his own books could perish. We turn now to the rhubarb. Rhubarb in these books does not mean the sour garden stalk of a pie, but the dried root of a very different eastern plant, carried overland from the far reaches of Asia at great cost, and reckoned among the finest of the purging medicines. It was valued especially for the liver, and for a stomach grown foul and sluggish, working to cleanse and to strengthen at once, and it was thought gentle enough, in careful doses, to be given even to the weak. The true root was so costly, and so often counterfeited, that the old books took pains to describe how the good sort might be told from the false. The long road that root travelled from the mountains of the East across half the world to a European sickbed is a story in itself, and Constantine's books were among those that taught the West what it was, and how to use it. Each such medicine was a thread tying the cold cloisters of the North to a wider and older world of learning. We turn now to the sugar. Sugar, which we think of now as the plainest thing in any kitchen, entered medieval Europe as a rare and precious medicine, one from the pressed cane of warm countries, and known to the West largely through the Arab learning these books carried. It was reckoned a gentle, strengthening substance, kindly to the chest and the stomach, and above all it became the great vehicle of medicine, the sweet base in which bitter remedies were dissolved and preserved. The very art of the syrup, of cooking a healing juice with sugar until it kept, came west along this same road of translation. It is strange and rather touching to think of sugar as a costly drug, weighed out with care and kept under lock, when it is now the most common thing on any table. Its journey from precious medicine to everyday sweetness is one more small measure of how far the world has travelled since these books were written. We turn now to the violet syrup. The violet was among the sweet flowers that this new learning taught the West to preserve in syrup, and violet syrup became one of the gentlest and best loved remedies of the age. The small purple flowers were gathered in spring, steeped, and cooked with sugar into a fragrant, cooling syrup of a lovely deep color, which was given for a cough and a tight chest, to cool the heat of a fever, and as a mild and kindly purge fit even for children. Its gentleness and its sweetness made it a medicine that the sick took gladly rather than with dread. There is something fitting in so much of this hard, one Eastern learning flowering, at the end of its long road, into a remedy as gentle as a spoonful of violet syrup given to a coughing child. The grandest chains of scholarship existed, in the end, to ease exactly such small and ordinary sufferings. We turn now to the tamarind. Tamarind is the sour brown pulp that fills the pods of a great tropical tree, and it came into Western medicine through these translated books as a cooling, gentle laxative much prized in fevers. Steeped in water into a sharp, sweet, sour drink, it was given to cool the heat of the blood, to quench a feverish thirst, and to loosen the bowels kindly, where a harsher purge would have troubled a weakened patient. Its pleasant sourness made it, like the violet and the sugar, one of the remedies that comforted even as it worked. The tamarind, the senna, the rhubarb, and the camphor together tell the same quiet story of a whole pharmacy of cooling and gentle Eastern medicines brought west by one converted merchant turned monk, and kept alive through every ruin of his mountain house. We turn now to the last of them tonight. Nutmeg, the fragrant seed of a far eastern tree, and its lacy red covering called mace, came west by the same long roads of trade and learning, and the old books reckon it warm and comforting. A little of the grated seed was given to settle a cold and queasy stomach, to sweeten a sour breath, and to comfort a heavy and aching head, and its rich scent was thought to cheer and steady a low spirit. Like cinnamon and ginger, it was a costly spice that served the table and the sick-room alike. With the warm scent of nutmeg, we close the books of Constantine, and with them the whole southern and eastern half of our night, the resins and roots and spices carried from far countries into the cold cloisters of the West. Let us turn now, gratefully, back toward home, to an old herbal in our own English tongue that came within a breath of burning. Since the book we come to now was nearly taken by flame, let us pause a moment on fire itself, the oldest and most dreaded enemy of every book that has ever been made. A manuscript is, after all, only dried skin and ink, and a library is a room full of such tinder, and through all the centuries of candlelight and hearth, fires and rush, lights the dread of fire lay quietly behind every collection of books. A single overturned candle in the night, a spark from a hearth, a lightning strike on a dry roof, and the patient work of many lifetimes could be gone by morning, whole libraries turned to ash, and a floating drift of blackened leaves before anyone could wake and reach them. The history of books is, in large part, a history of fires. Great libraries of the ancient world burned and took uncounted treasures with them. Monasteries burned, some more than once, and each burning swallowed books that had no other copy anywhere, remedies and stories and songs that simply ceased, in a single night, to exist. We cannot even name most of what was lost, for the only record of those books was the books themselves, and when they burned, the very memory of them burned too. All that survives is a sense of absence, a gap where something once was. And yet fire, for all its terror, was not always complete in its work. Now and then a book at the edge of a blaze was pulled clear, or lay in a press that the flames did not quite reach, or was carried out in someone's arms into the cold night, while the roof fell in behind them. Such books often bear the mark of it ever after, their edges scorched brown, their leaves cockled and darkened by the heat, and to hold one is to hold a survivor that still carries the smell of its own near end. The book we are about to open is one of these, touched by fire and living still, and its scorched edges are a kind of testimony. There is a strange comfort even in this, for it reminds us that survival was never guaranteed and never owed, that everything we still have came through real danger and might easily not have come at all. That makes each surviving book not a thing to be taken for granted, but a small, improbable gift, snatched from an ending it very nearly met. Let that thought rest quietly with you now, the dread of the flame and the mercy of the narrow escape, and let us open the herbal that walked through fire. The 8th book is a herbal far older in its roots than its surviving pages, for it descends from a late Roman work that went under the name of Apuleius, copied and recopied through the monasteries for many centuries. The copy we open tonight is an English one, the Old English Herbarium, written out in the Anglo-Saxon tongue with careful painted pictures of each plant beside its uses. For long years it lay, with a great collection of other precious manuscripts, in the library of a single devoted collector, and it was there, one winter night, that fire broke out in the house that held them. Many of that collection's treasures were burned outright or scorched past reading. This herbal came through the flames marked but living, its edges touched by the heat, and it survives today, one of the oldest books of physic in the English language, saved by the narrowest of margins from the fire. Let us read a few of its plants. It opens, as so many herbals do, with botany, and here at last we find our old friend set at the very head of the book, given the first and longest chapter of all. The Old English Herbarium heaps upon it a great catalogue of virtues, naming it good for the head and the eyes, good for the stomach, good against weariness, and against fearful dreams in the night, so that a sprig of it worn about the person was thought to guard the sleeper from frightening visions. As a medicine, the dried leaves were steeped into a strengthening daily tea, laid as a poultice on wounds, and taken against a long list of ordinary aches. This is the third book tonight to give botany pride of place, after the rhyming poem of Macer and, in its way, the plants of the garden. And that is precisely the point worth pausing on. No single herb was written down more often or more warmly than botany, and it is that endless a repetition, book after book after book, that carried its long reputation down to us whole, while rarer plants slipped quietly out of memory. We turn now to the plantain. Plantain appears here under its Old English name of waybread, the broad, leaved plant of every trodden path, and the herbarium gives it much the same wound, healing honour we saw in Macer's verse. The bruised leaves were laid on cuts, sores, and the bites of dogs and stinging things to cool them and draw them clean, and the juice was taken for the fluxes of the bowels and dropped onto sore eyes. So common was it, and so reliable, that it stood among the very first remedies any household reached for when the skin was broken. Here again is a plant met already tonight, in another book and another age, and here again its plainness is its strength. Waybread grew in every footpath in the land, and a remedy that grows in every footpath is a remedy that can never be burned or lost, only, at worst, forgotten for a while and then found underfoot again. We turn now to the mugwort. Mugwort too returns, and the herbarium gives it a traveller's magic much like the poems do, naming it a guard for the wayfarer against weariness and against the ills of the road. Bound about the feet or tucked into the shoe, it was believed to keep a walker from tiring on a long day's journey, and hung by the door or worn about the person, it was thought to turn aside harm and evil. As a plain medicine, its bitter leaves were steeped into a tea for the stomach and for the troubles of women. That the same handful of common herbs, betony and plantain and mugwort, should walk together from book to book across the centuries, is the quiet lesson of this whole night. They survived not because they were rare and guarded, but because they were common and beloved, written into every herbal by every hand. We turn now to the vervain. Vervain, the sacred herb we met in Macer's poem, has its own honoured chapter here, wrapped in the same air of reverence and half magic. It was gathered with old ceremony, worn and hung about the house as a guard against harm, and used as a medicine for wounds and sores, for the bites of serpents, and in washes for a sore mouth and throat. The herbarium sets its healing powers and its protecting powers down side by side, as though they were one and the same. To the monks who copied this book, there was no strangeness in that pairing, for they saw the care of the body and the guarding of the soul as a single work. A herb that cleaned a wound and turned aside misfortune was, to them, simply a good herb, doing good in every way it could. We turn now to the periwinkle. The periwinkle, a low trailing plant with glossy leaves and star-shaped blue flowers, was valued in this herbarium as much for its protecting virtue as for its physic. Worn about the person or hung in the house, it was thought to guard against harm and against the frightening sicknesses of the mind, and as a medicine it was taken for cramps and used, bound about a limb, to staunch bleeding and steady the flesh. Its long, tough, trailing stems gave it a reputation as a binding, holding plant, both in the hand and in the older lore. It is one of the gentler and prettier of the herbarium's plants, and its blue flowers, faithfully painted beside its chapter, must have brightened many a copious long day at the desk. That such small beauties survived the fire along with the practical cures is a mercy, for they remind us these were made by human hands that loved a flower's color as well as its use. We turn now to the mayweed. Mayweed, which we would call the wild chamomile, appears here with its small white daisy flowers and its sweet, apple-like scent, and the herbarium gives it for the eyes and for aching, weary limbs. A warm infusion of the flowers was taken to soothe and calm, laid as a fomentation on a sore or swollen place, and dropped, cooled, onto tired eyes. Its gentle, drowsy sweetness made it a comfort as much as a cure, one of those remedies whose scent alone seemed to ease the sufferer. We shall meet its cousin among the 9 great herbs of a later book, for chamomile, in its several kinds, ran all through this medicine, always for the same soft and soothing purposes. It is another of the common comforts that no fire could ever quite burn away. We turn now to the last plant of this book tonight. Mullein closes our reading, the tall plant with soft, woolly, grey, green leaves and a great spike of yellow flowers, which the old lore wrapped in a famous story. It was mullein, the herbarium, and its Roman forebears claimed that a god once gave to a wandering hero as a guard against enchantment on a dangerous shore, and so the plant was long worn by travellers against fear and the beasts of the road. As a plain medicine, its soft leaves were steeped for a cough and a tight chest, and the down of them was even used, in some places, as a wick for a rushlight. With mullein and its old story of a guarded traveller, we close the fire-touched English herbal, and it is fitting to leave it on a note of safe passage, for the book itself passed safely through fire to reach us. Let us set it gently aside, its scorched edges and all, and turn to another Old English book of physic, one that slept for centuries in a king's own collection. Before we open it, let us rest a while on the question of how such precious books were kept safe at all, for a book that has survived 1,000 years has been guarded somewhere through every one of those years. In the great houses, books were treasure in the most literal sense, worth more than their weight in almost anything, and they were kept accordingly. The most precious were stored flat in wooden presses and chests, wrapped in cloth against the damp, brought out only with clean and careful hands. In the libraries of a later age, The books were often chained, each one fastened to its shelf or its reading desk by a length of iron chain, not to imprison them, but to keep them from wandering, so that a book might be read by anyone who came, but carried off by no one. There was a whole quiet discipline around the keeping of books. They were counted and listed and checked. A borrower might have to leave another book as a pledge before he could take one away, and the little rhyme at the end of tonight's next book, asking that it not be lent carelessly, belongs to exactly this world of anxious, loving care. Books were bound in stout wooden boards covered in leather, sometimes studded with bosses of metal, so that they would not wear against the shelf, clasped shut so that their leaves would lie flat and not cockle in the damp. Everything about their making and keeping was designed to help them last. And still, for all that care, so much depended on simple, unbroken continuity, on their being, in every generation, someone whose task it was to keep the books, to air them, to mend a broken binding, to recopy a leaf grown too faint to read, to keep the roof sound above them and the mice away below. A library was not a thing that survived on its own. It survived only as long as it was tended, and the moment the tending stopped, the slow ruin began. The books that reached us are the ones that never lost their keepers for too long at a stretch. There is a great and quiet dignity in that long labor of keeping, so much of it done by people whose names are wholly lost, who spent their lives simply making sure that what had been handed to them was handed on again unharmed. They added nothing and wrote nothing, and are remembered by no one. And yet without them the whole inheritance would have crumbled. Let that patient, nameless guardianship settle in your mind now, the chained shelves and the wrapped presses and the careful hands, and let us turn to a book whose keepers did their work well. The 9th book is Bold's Leechbook, one of the oldest and most complete books of medicine to survive in the English tongue. Written out more than 1,000 years ago by a scribe named Sild at the bidding of a man named Bold, whose name it still carries. At the end of it, the two of them left a little rhyme, asking that the book be kept safe and not lent carelessly to others. And by some quiet mercy it was kept safe indeed, through the long centuries and through the great breaking up of the monasteries, when countless such books were burned, sold, or torn apart. This one passed into a royal collection and slept there, and so it lived. Its remedies are set down in careful order, from the crown of the head to the soles of the feet, and among them, kept apart tonight from its most famous cure, are many gentle salves and drinks well worth the reading. Let us open it softly. The first we come to is the Holy Salve, a great green healing ointment built of many herbs at once, Beatany and the others among them, gathered and pounded together, and boiled slowly in butter, until the fat took on their whole green strength and virtue. Once made and strained and set to cool, this single salve was kept ready for a great range of hurts, spread on wounds and sores, on sore and aching places, and on the skin wherever it was broken or inflamed. The book gives long and careful directions for its making, naming each herb in its turn. What sets the holy salve apart from an ordinary ointment is that its making was accompanied by words, by prayers and blessings spoken over the herbs as they were gathered and again as they were cooked, so that the finished salve carried both the virtue of the plants and the comfort of the blessing. To the leech who made it, there was no division between the two. The green strength of the herbs and the spoken prayer were poured into the same pot together and drawn out again together in the salve. There is a great gentleness in imagining that salve made. The herbs gathered in the cool of the morning, the low fire, the butter slowly greening, the quiet words spoken over the pot, and a whole winter's worth of small healings held ready in a single covered crock. We turn now to the wound drink. For deeper hurts the book gives a wound drink, a remedy taken inwardly to help the body mend a wound from within, while the salve did its work without. Botany again stands among its herbs, steeped with others in ile or in warm water, and the drink was given to someone gravely hurt to strengthen them, and, it was believed, to cleanse the wound from the inside. The book sets down which herbs to gather and how long to let them steep, in the plain, practical voice of long experience. It is worth pausing on how sensible much of this old wound care truly was, for the leeches understood, without any of our later knowledge, that a wound must be kept clean and the whole body kept strong if it were to heal, and they reached for bitter, cleansing herbs to that end. Their reasons were not always ours, but their care and their results were often better than a later age gave them credit for. That so practical a book came through the dissolution at all is a piece of good fortune. For in those years, whole libraries of such English learning were carried off and destroyed, and much that had been gathered over 500 years was lost in a single generation. This book's survival lets us hear the plain voice of an English leech still. We turn now to the salve for aching feet. The book gives a soothing salve for weary, aching feet, a small mercy in an age when nearly every journey was made on foot, and few walked less than they must. Herbs were pounded and warmed into fat or butter, and rubbed into the tired soles and ankles at the end of a long day, to ease the ache and soften the hard, worn skin. A warm foot, bath of steeped herbs sometimes went before the salve, drawing out the day's weariness before the ointment was worked in. There is something very human in finding, among the graver cures for wounds and fevers, so homely a remedy as a salve for tired feet, and it reminds us that these books were written for the whole round of ordinary suffering, the small daily aches as much as the great dangers. One imagines the salve reached for at the day's end in a busy house, an old and simple comfort passed down and written into the book almost as an afterthought, yet valued by everyone who ever came home footsore in the dark. We turn now to the remedy for the aching head. For the aching, throbbing head, the book offers a remedy that joins herb and gesture together, for it directs that a certain herb be gathered and bound about the brow, sometimes with a thread of red wool, while the sufferer rested. Botany and vervain, those two much trusted herbs, were among those reached for, steeped into a wash to bathe the temples or bound fresh against them. The binding itself, the cool press of the leaf, and the quiet of lying still, was surely half the cure. The red wool that appears in so many of these old remedies had a long life in country healing, its colour thought to lend some virtue of its own, and whether or not it did, the small ritual of the binding gave the sufferer something to hold to while the ache slowly passed. It is easy to smile at the red thread, but harder to deny the comfort of being tended, of having cool leaves bound gently to one's brow by careful hands in a quiet room. Much of the good these remedies did lay in exactly that tending. We turn now to a stranger remedy. Among the book's cures, is one for a troublesome swelling of the skin that the Old English named for the water, elf, imagining an unseen cause behind a sickness they could not otherwise explain. The remedy itself was practical enough, a wash and a poultice of steeped herbs laid on the swollen place, joined, as so often, to spoken words meant to drive the trouble out. The book names the herbs and the words together, without any sense that one was medicine, and the other was not. These elf-named sicknesses tell us less about elves than about a people trying honestly to make sense of illnesses whose causes they could not see, and reaching, quite reasonably, for the herbs that seemed to help while naming the mystery as best they could. We need not share their picture of the world to feel the kindness in it. The careful washing of a swollen place and the quiet words spoken over it by someone who wished the sufferer well. We turn now to the last remedy from the Leechbook tonight. The book gives, finally, a simple herb and butter salve for troubled and broken skin, made much like the holy salve but plainer, herbs pounded into fresh butter and left to draw, then spread on chapped, cracked, or inflamed skin to soften and heal it. In a cold, hard-working world where hands and faces were forever chapped by wind and water, such a salve was among the most constantly needed of all remedies, and every household knew some form of it. That so much of this ancient book is taken up with the plainest complaints, sore skin and tired feet and aching heads, is a quiet testament to what medicine mostly is, the patient easing of small and ordinary sufferings, day after day, rather than the great dramatic cures. We close Bold's Leechbook now, its 1,000-year-old rhyme asking that it be kept safe, fulfilled beyond anything its writers could have hoped, and turn to a companion book of the same old tongue, one that gathered up the charms and the herb, lore of the Anglo-Saxon world. Let us pause once more and think of the shape of the days in which all this work was done, for the copying and the healing alike were fitted into a life ruled, above everything, by prayer. The monastic day was divided by bells, from the deep of the night to the fall of dark, into set hours of worship that never changed, and around that unbending frame everything else was arranged. The monks rose in the black of night for the first office, and returned again and again through the day, leaving whatever they were doing when the bell called, so that the work of the scriptorium and the infirmary and the garden was always done in the spaces between prayers, taken up and set down and taken up again as the hours turned. There is a great steadiness in that rhythm, a slow and unhurried pulse beneath all the labor. A scribe did not sit down to write a book in one long push. He wrote a little and prayed and wrote a little more, day after day, month after month, the work advancing by small patient stages within a life that returned always to the same still center. The very slowness of it, that we might now think a hindrance, was perhaps part of what made the work so careful and so lasting. Nothing was rushed, because the day was not built for rushing, and the same bells that framed the copying framed the healing too. The infirmary tended his patients between the offices, mixed his salves, and carried his broths in the spaces of the day. And the sick in the infirmary heard the same bells, the same distant chanting drifting through the walls, marking the hours of their own long recovery. To lie ill in such a house was to lie within a great slow clockwork of prayer, tended by hands that stepped away to worship and came back again, hour after hour, day after day, until you were well or until you were not. It is a rhythm almost impossible to imagine from within our own hurried time, and there is a deep rest in merely contemplating it, a life so ordered and so unhurried that a single book might take a year and no one thought it slow. The bells rang, the hours turned, the work went quietly on, and the knowledge was kept, not in a burst of effort, but in a long, patient, unbroken rhythm that lasted for centuries. Let that slow tolling of the hours settle around you now, and let us turn to the last of our Old English books. The 10th book is called the Lacnunga, which means simply the Remedies, a gathered miscellany of cures and charms written in Old English and Latin together, and it too came down to us through long neglect and the near reach of fire, surviving damp and dark and centuries of being forgotten before it was valued again. Its most famous page holds the 9 herbs charm, a remedy and a chant together, in which 9 plants are named and praised, and set against poison and against what the Old English called the flying venom, the unseen sickness thought to travel on the air. Mugwort, waybread, and mayweed are among the 9 herbs we have already met tonight, and beside them stand others we have not. Let us read a few of them, and then the great salve that bound them all together. The first of these is lamb's cress, a small peppery plant of the wet ground, kin to the watercress, which the charm names among its 9 and country people gathered gladly in the spring. Eaten fresh, its sharp green leaves were valued as a cleanser of the winter, heavy blood, a bright and bracing tonic after months of stored and salted food, and it was thought to quicken a sluggish body and clear a dull head. Its peppery bite was medicine in itself, waking the sense the way a cold wind wakes the skin. That so humble a cress should stand among the 9 great herbs against poison tells us how highly these plain spring greens were valued, in an age when the long winter left bodies starved of anything fresh and green. The first cress of the year was a small yearly rescue. One imagines it gathered from the edge of a cold running stream in the thin light of early spring, a handful of sharp green life at the end of a hungry season, welcome far beyond anything its modest look would suggest. We turn now to the nettle. The nettle, that stinging plant of every hedge, bank and waste corner, stands among the 9, and for all its unfriendly sting, it was among the most valued of the wild herbs. Cut young in spring and cooked, its sting quite gone, it made a nourishing green pot, herb and a cleansing tonic for the blood, and its juice and its steeped leaves were taken for a whole range of weaknesses. Even its sting was turned to use. The fresh plant laid against stiff and aching joints in the belief that its burning drew out a deeper pain. There is a rough justice the old herbalists loved in a plant that hurts the careless hand yet heals the body, and the nettle earned a lasting respect precisely because it had to be approached with knowledge and care. That it should be numbered among the sacred 9, set in the same breath as the gentle mayweed and the peppery cress, shows how little these people judged a herb by its manners and how much by its worth. We turn now to the crab apple. The wild crab apple, which the charm names in its old form, is the small, hard, sour ancestor of the orchard apple, and it too was numbered among the 9. Its sharp juice, pressed out into the sour verjuice of the medieval kitchen, was used to cool a fever and to cut the richness of heavy food. And the fruit itself, for all its mouth, puckering soreness, was cooked down for the stomach and the bowels. A wash of the sour juice was even laid on hot and inflamed places on the skin. That a fruit too sour to eat with pleasure should be so prized shows again how these people wasted nothing the hedgerow offered, finding a use for the hard little apples that the birds and the pigs would otherwise have had. The crab tree, gnarled and thorny and long-lived, was a familiar landmark in many a parish, and its yearly crop of sour fruit was gathered as carefully as any sweeter harvest for its uses in the kitchen and the sick-room alike. We turn now to the thyme, wild thyme. Low and creeping and sweetly aromatic, is counted among the 9, and it was among the most pleasant of all the charm's herbs to gather and to use. A warm infusion of it was taken for a cough and a tight chest, and to settle an uneasy stomach, and its clean, strong scent was thought to cheer the spirit and cleanse the air. Bound into small bundles, it sweetened stored linen and the close air of a room, and it drew the bees in summer to the bank where it grew. Of all the 9 herbs, thyme is perhaps the one whose virtue a modern nose would grant most readily, for its warm scent still speaks plainly of health and cleanliness, as it did to the people who set it among their sacred plants. That so sweet and common a herb of the sunny bank should be reckoned a guard against poison is one more sign of how these charms gathered up the best, loved plants of the countryside and set them, all together, against the fears of the age. We turn now to the venom loather. Among the 9 stands a herb, the Old English called the venom loather, the one that hates poison, and scholars have long argued over exactly which plant it was, for its old name outlived the certain knowledge of the plant it named. Whatever it was, the charm sets it squarely against poison and against the flying venom, a herb gathered and pounded with the rest into the great salve, trusted above all for its power to draw out and defeat what was harmful in the body. There is a quiet poignancy in a remedy whose very plant is now uncertain, its name surviving where the knowledge of it did not, and it stands as a small emblem of this whole night, of how much was nearly lost, and how thin the thread by which even the little we have came down to us, that we can still read the name and feel the old trust in it, even when we can no longer say for certain which leaf to gather, is itself a kind of survival, incomplete but real. We turn now to the mayweed, and then to the salve. Mayweed, the wild chamomile we met among the fire, touched Herbal's plants, returns here as one of the 9, and the charm sets it against the flying venom, alongside its 8 companions. Its small white flowers and sweet apple scent, so soothing in an ordinary infusion, were pounded into the great salve with the others, its gentleness lending itself to the whole. Here it is not a cure taken alone, but one voice in a chorus of 9, each herb adding its strength to the rest. And so we come to the salve itself, the remedy that gathered all 9 together. The herbs were pounded to a paste with old soap and the juice of apples, worked with water and ash, and over them the charm was sung, we are told, 3 times, before the salve was laid on the poisoned or swollen place. Herb and word and gesture were made one, the 9 strengths of the plants and the strength of the chant poured together into a single healing. That such a remedy survived at all, sung once over a sick bed in a vanished English village, and written down on a page, that then lay forgotten for centuries in the dark, is the very heart of tonight's long story. We close the Lacnunga gently now, its 9 herbs named and its charm fallen quiet again, and turn to a book so large that a grown man could barely lift it, which went away to a great war and came safely home. Let us pause here for a moment, halfway through our night, and simply rest among the books a while before we open the next. It is worth remembering, as the candle burns lower, that every one of these manuscripts was made entirely by hand, letter after letter, in the cold of a scriptorium, by monks and nuns who would never know that we would one day read what they wrote. A single book might take one person the better part of a year. Bent over the sloping desk, in the thin light of the short winter days, the ink freezing, the fingers stiff, the same patient work taken up again each morning after prayers. They copied not for fame, for their names are mostly lost, but so that the knowledge might not die, so that some sick stranger in a century they would never see might be eased by a remedy they had troubled to write down. There is a great tenderness in that, and a great trust. The trust that hands as yet unborn would keep what these hands had made. Most of the time that trust was kept, though only barely, and only by other hands as patient as the first. Let that thought settle softly as we turn to the next book, the largest of them all. The 11th book is so great and so heavy that it is known simply as the Giant Codex, a vast volume gathering the collected works of Hildegard of Bingen, the remarkable abbess who lived some 8.5 centuries ago on a hill above the river Rhine. She was many things at once: a leader of women, a writer of visions, a composer of soaring music, and, for our purposes tonight, one of the very few named healers of the whole medieval world, to leave a full book of remedies in her own voice. Her book of physic describes the healing virtues of plants and trees and stones, all of it lit by her particular idea of a green and living force, a greening power she believed flowed through every growing thing, and rightly used, through the healing of the body too. The Giant Codex that holds her work has its own quiet story of survival, for in the last Great War it was carried away from its home for safekeeping, and after the city it had been sent to was burned. It was feared lost for years, until at last it was found again and brought home safe some 3 years after the war had ended. Let us open it gently, for it is very heavy. The first remedy we find is galangal, a warming aromatic root much like ginger, which Hildegard prized above almost every other spice and called, in effect, a spice of life. She gave it above all for the heart, for the sudden pains and heaviness of the chest, teaching that a little of the powdered root, taken at the first sign of such trouble, would warm and steady and revive. A small piece held in the mouth and slowly chewed was her simple counsel for a faintness of the heart, and she wrote of it with the confidence of long use in her own infirmary. There is a directness in Hildegard's remedies that sets them apart from the borrowed learning of many other books, for she writes as one who had tended the sick with her own hands and trusted what she had seen. Where other authors pile up the authorities of the past, she tells you plainly what to reach for and what it will do, in the voice of a woman used to being obeyed. That her whole book survived the fire of a modern war, when so much older and so much newer was lost in those same years. Lets that plain, confident voice reach us still, warm and unhurried, across more than 800 years. We turn now to the spelt. Spelt, the old hardy grain that Hildegard called by its German name and loved above all others, she held to be the very best of grains, gentle and wholesome and cheering, and she taught that it made good blood, and a glad and steady mind in whoever ate it. For the sick and the weak above all, she counselled spelt. cooked soft into a nourishing gruel that troubled even the frailest stomach not at all, and given to the convalescent to build them slowly back to strength. A person low in body and spirit, she wrote, would be lifted by it as by few other foods. It is striking to find, in a book of remedies, such care given to what the sick should simply eat. But Hildegard understood that food and medicine were not two separate things, and that a weak body must be nourished before any cure could take hold. Her gentle gruel of spelt was as much a remedy, in her eyes, as any bitter draught. That so homely a counsel, to feed the ailing a soft and cheering porridge, should come down to us in the same great book, as her towering visions is part of what makes Hildegard so beloved. She never forgot the body's plainest needs. We turn now to the chestnut. The chestnut tree Hildegard reckoned warm and full of virtue, and she found a use in nearly every part of it. The sweet nuts within the spiny husks she gave for the head, for the heart, and for the liver, teaching that eaten often they strengthened a weak brain and a failing memory, and warmed a cold and heavy heart. Cooked soft and eaten, or their water drunk, they were her counsel for a body worn down by weakness and by the pains that we would call gout, and she wrote of the tree with real affection. Hildegard's whole medicine is threaded through with this sense of warmth and coldness, of greenness and dryness, each plant and tree placed carefully within it, and the chestnut she set firmly among the warming, strengthening things, a friend to the weary body. There is a wholeness to her way of seeing, in which a tree is not merely a source of separate remedies, but a single living thing with its own warm nature, that lends her book a beauty quite apart from its usefulness. We turn now to the quince. The quince, that hard and fragrant golden fruit too sour and woody to eat raw, Hildegard gave above all for the pains and heaviness that we would name gout, teaching that eaten cooked, often and patiently, it drew off and eased those deep aches in the joints. Cooked with honey into a fragrant paste, it was a gentle and pleasant medicine, and its use for the ailing joints was remembered long after her name had faded, passed down in kitchens that no longer knew whose counsel they were following. It is one of the quiet ways these books live on, that a remedy outlives the memory of its author, folded into common practice, until no one recalls that a certain abbess on the Rhine first wrote it down. The knowledge survives even when the name does not, that we can now open her book again and give her back her due, naming her as the source of a remedy long thought merely old, is one of the small justices that the survival of such a manuscript allows. We turn now to the violet. The violet, that small and modest spring flower, Hildegard turned into one of her most valued salves, cooking the flowers gently in oil and tallow into a soft green ointment. This violet salve she gave for the eyes, to cool and clear them, and for troubles of the skin, laid on sores and inflamed places. But most strikingly, she gave it also for a darkening of the mind, for the heavy, clouded low spirits that she understood as a real sickness needing a real remedy. A person weighed down by such heaviness, she taught, might be eased by the gentle salve and the sweet scent of the flower. That she should treat a darkened, melancholy mind as a true sickness to be tended, with the same care as a sore or a fever, speaks of a wisdom well ahead of much that came after, and her violet salve carries that quiet compassion in it still. The small purple flower, cooked into a healing balm for the body and the troubled mind alike, is a fitting emblem of her whole gentle art. We turn now to the last of her remedies tonight, feverfew, the small bitter daisy of the garden Hildegard gave for the digestion, and for the particular troubles of women, and for the fevers whose name the plant still carries. The bitter leaves were taken in a warm infusion to settle a disordered stomach, and to bring on an easing warmth, and she counselled it with the plain confidence she brought to all her cures. Lovage, too, that tall celery-scented herb she reached for, giving it steeped with other herbs for a heavy cough and for pains about the heart and side. With the feverfew and the lovage we close the giant codex, easing its great weight shut again, this vast book that a grown person can barely lift, and that survived a burning city to reach us. Let us rest it back upon the desk and turn to a book older still, and lovelier, the oldest herbal in the world, that still survives nearly whole. Before we open it, let us breathe once more in the quiet, for the book we come to now is more than 1,500 years old, older by far than any we have yet touched tonight. Imagine the sheer span of time it has passed through unbroken, hand to hand and shelf to shelf, through the fall of empires and the burning of cities, its painted flowers as fresh on the page as the year they were made. There is a deep and settling calm in the thought of it, a thing so fragile lasting so long. Let that calm gather around you as we turn its first leaf. The 12th book is the great illustrated Herbal that was made in Constantinople more than 1,500 years ago for a royal princess of that city, and it copies out the ancient work of Dioscorides, the Greek physician whose survey of healing plants stood as the highest authority in medicine for more than 1,000 years. What makes this particular copy so precious is that it is painted, each plant shown in a full and careful picture beside its uses, so that turning its leaves is like walking through a garden set down in color long ages ago. It came through the fall of its city, when Constantinople was taken and so much was lost. Sheltered through those hard years in a monastery within the walls, and it was seen there long after by a traveling scholar, and at last carried west to a great imperial library, where it rests to this day. Let us read a few of the plants painted in it. The first is the bramble, the wild blackberry of every hedge and thicket, which Dioscorides and his painted copy set down for its binding, astringent power. The leaves and the young shoots, steeped into a wash, were used for a sore mouth and throat, and for firming loose and bleeding gums, and the same infusion, taken inwardly, was given for the looseness and fluxes of the bowels. The dark ripe berries were a food, and a gentle medicine both, cooked into cooling syrups, and the root, dug and boiled, was reckoned the most binding part of all. It is a plant so common that we scarcely see it, tearing at our sleeves along every summer path, and yet here it is, painted with loving care in a royal book 15 centuries ago, given the same grave attention as the rarest drug of the East. That evenness of regard, the humble bramble treated as worthy of a princess's herbal, is part of the quiet greatness of the old learning. The berries that stain our fingers each late summer were staining the fingers of gatherers in the same way, when this book was new, and will, we may hope, long after it, and we are gone. We turn now to the comfrey. Comfrey, that tall, rough-leaved plant of the damp ground, appears in the painted Herbal under its old power as the great knitter of broken places. Its thick root, dug and grated and pounded into a paste, was packed and bound over a broken limb, where, as it dried, it stiffened into something like a light cast, holding the bone steady while it mended beneath. The bruised leaves were laid on sprains and bruises and deep aches, and the plant's very name in later tongues came to mean the knitting together of what was broken. That so sure a remedy for broken bones should be pictured in a book this old shows how long and how faithfully the best of the plant knowledge was carried. From the ancient Greek physician who first wrote it down, through the painters of Constantinople, and on into the Leechbooks and cottage gardens of the far north and west. It is one more of the plants that walk through nearly every book of the night, and its steady presence, age after age, is the very reason we have it still. We turn now to a plant to be handled with care. Henbane, a dull and heavy, scented plant of waste places, appears in the painted Herbal among the drugs to be used with the greatest caution, for it was known to be strong and dangerous as well as useful. In careful and knowing hands it was reached for to dull a fierce pain, and to bring sleep to someone worn out by suffering, and the smoke of its smouldering seed was drawn in an old and much repeated remedy against the ache of a rotten tooth. The old books that named its users named, in the same breath, its dangers, and counselled that it be left to those who truly knew it. That honest doubleness, praising a remedy and warning of it together, is one of the most trustworthy notes in all this old writing, and it runs especially clear through the pages given to the strong and perilous plants. These were not reckless people. They knew that the line between a medicine and a poison lay only in the amount. We name henbane tonight not as a thing to seek, but as a thing the old herbals knew and feared, and used with care. One more piece of hard, one knowledge painted into this ancient book. We turn now to the mandrake. The mandrake is the most storied plant in the whole Herbal. Its thick forked root, so often shaped like a little human figure, that a great tangle of legend grew up around it, and the painted book shows it, as such books often did, with a small man-like form among its leaves. Beyond the lore, it had a true and serious use, for its root, steeped in wine, was among the oldest of the sleeping medicines, given to dull the senses and bring a deep and heavy sleep. Even, the old books tell us, before the pain of the surgeon's knife. The famous tale that the root shrieked when pulled from the earth, and that the sound could harm the one who drew it, was itself a kind of warning, wrapping a dangerous plant in a story that kept careless hands away. It is fascinating to see, in the calm painted pages of a royal Herbal, both the sober medicine and the wild legend set down together, for to the people of that age, they were not truly separate. The story guarded the plant, and the plant did its grave and careful work, that such deep old lore comes to us at all, painted and whole, through the fall of an empire and the long centuries after, is among the small wonders of this book's survival. We turn now to the iris. The iris, grown as much for the beauty of its flower as for its physic, gave up its true medicine from the thick root that crept beneath the soil, which, dried, took on a sweet scent much like the violet. Powdered, this sweet root was given for the chest and for a stubborn cough, thought to loosen and bring up what lay clogged within, and its lovely fragrance made it prized as well for sweetening linen, breath, and rooms. The painted Herbal shows the tall flower in full color, its healing root hidden, as ever, out of sight below. There is a fittingness in a plant grown for beauty yielding its medicine only from the unseen root, and the old herbals loved such doubleness. The show above and the substance below. We turn now to the last plant of this ancient book tonight. Wild celery, which the old books call smallage, closes our reading, a strong, scented plant of the wet ground. Rougher and more pungent than the celery of the table. Its bruised seed, steeped into a warm drink, was given to help the body pass its water freely, and to ease the aches that came when it would not. And the whole plant, cooked, was reckoned a cleansing spring food for a body grown sluggish. Its powerful scent, so much stronger than its garden cousin, was part of what marked it as the more medicinal of the two. With the smallage we close the oldest of all our books, its painted garden folded shut again, and marvel once more that so fragile a thing has outlasted the very empire that made it. Let us set it down with great care and turn now to a sadder chapter, to the books that were not so lucky, the ones that were broken up and scattered when the great houses fell. Before we open the next chapter, let us think for a moment of the quieter enemies of books, the ones that worked not in a single night of flame, but slowly, patiently, over years. Fire is the danger we picture first, but far more manuscripts were lost to damp than ever burned, the pages slowly spotting and softening and sticking together in a cold cellar or a leaking roof, the ink blurring, the parchment cockling and rotting at the edges, until a whole book fell quietly to ruin. And there were the small living creatures, the mouse that gnawed a nest in a neglected volume, the bookworm boring its slow round tunnels through page after page, the moth and the beetle. A book left unread and untended was a book slowly eaten, unnoticed, in the dark. It is a strange and humbling thought that so much knowledge survived only because someone kept turning the pages, kept the roof sound, and the fire dry and the mice at bay, year after year, for no reward but the keeping itself. Let that quiet, patient care settle around you now, as we open a chapter about the books that lost their keepers. The 13th chapter is not a single book, but the memory of many, the physic books of the English monastery infirmaries, which came to grief all together in one hard generation. For long centuries every great abbey had kept its own infirmary, its own herb garden, and its own gathered receipts of remedies, written and copied and added to by one infirmary after another. Then, some 500 years ago, the monasteries of England were dissolved and emptied within a few short years, their lands taken and their houses pulled down, and their libraries, gathered over 500 years, were scattered to the four winds. Books were sold by the cartload, burned or torn apart, their strong parchment leaves used to wrap groceries, to score candlesticks, to patch windows, and to bind and cover other books. A few leaves of the old infirmary physic survive today, only because they were reused in this way, pasted inside the cover of some later volume, and forgotten there for 400 years. From those scattered survivals, and from the wider memory of what the infirmaries kept, let us gather a few of their gentle remedies. The first is almond milk, one of the truest comforts of the medieval sickroom, made by pounding blanched almonds to a paste with water and straining it into a smooth, pale, faintly sweet drink. It was given above all to the weak, the fasting, and the gravely ill, to those whose stomachs could bear nothing heavier, for it nourished gently and troubled the body not at all, and it could be taken on the many fast days when animal milk was not allowed. The infirmary kept almonds in store precisely for this, knowing that a patient too weak to eat might yet be coaxed to sip a little almond milk, and so be kept alive until strength returned. There is a deep tenderness in this remedy, which asks nothing of the sufferer, but to swallow something soft and mild, and which was reached for exactly when a body was at its lowest. Much of the infirmary's true art lay in such gentle nourishing, in keeping a failing patient fed and comforted, while nature did the slow work of mending. That the recipe for something so simple should have to be recovered from the pasted down leaf of a broken book is a small measure of how much was lost in those years, when even the plainest kindnesses had to be learned again from the wreckage. We turn now to the sugar of roses. The sugar of roses was among the prettiest of the infirmary's remedies, made by beating fresh red rose petals into sugar cooked to the point of setting, then shaping the fragrant pink mass into small tablets or lozenges that hardened as they cooled. These rose sugars were given as a cordial, a comfort for a faint and fluttering heart, and a strengthening sweet for someone worn low by long illness, dissolved slowly in the mouth for their gentle warmth and their scent of summer. They kept well, and a store of them was a small hoard of comfort against the hard months. Here once more is the rose, met so many times tonight in so many books, now pressed into sweet pink tablets for the failing heart, and here once more is the quiet reason its remedies reached us whole. Written into every book and made in every infirmary, the rose could never be forgotten. One imagines the small rose, colored lozenges laid by in a covered box on the infirmary shelf, a little sweetness kept ready for whoever should next need heartening, in a house where such kindnesses were the daily work. We turn now to the cordial waters. The infirmaries in their later centuries kept a still, and from it came the cordial waters, the fragrant distilled essences of herbs and flowers that were among the most prized remedies of the age. Balm and rosemary, roses and other sweet herbs were steeped and gently distilled, the rising vapor caught and cooled back into a clear, intensely scented water, and a spoonful of such a water was given to revive a faint spirit, to comfort the heart, and to cheer a body sunk in low and heavy humors. The making of them was a slow and careful art, and a well-kept still house was the pride of a good infirmary. The art of distilling, learned and refined in these religious houses, would outlast the houses themselves, passing into the still rooms of manor and cottage, so that the cordial waters of a later age were the direct children of the monastery still. In this, at least, the knowledge did not die with the buildings. There is something restful in imagining the quiet drip of the still in a warm corner of the infirmary, the slow gathering of a fragrant water drop by drop through a long afternoon. Patient work for the comfort of the sick. We turn now to the figure lectuary, for a tight and stubborn chest, and for the sluggish, bound body that so often went with it. The infirmary kept an electuary of figs, the soft sweet fruits pounded with honey, and a few warming seeds into a dark, rich paste. A spoonful taken slowly was thought to soften and loosen what lay clogged within, to ease a hard cough, and to move a stopped body gently and without violence. The sweetness of the figs made it a welcome medicine, and its mildness fitted it for the old and the weak. Figs, carried dried from warmer lands, were among the useful sweet stores every infirmary kept, as much food as medicine, and this gentle electuary was one of the pleasantest of all the chest remedies, reached for gladly by patient and infirmary alike. That so kindly a cure should be among the fragments recovered from the ruin of the monasteries is a small mercy, letting us taste, in the reading at least, the gentleness of that vanished care. We turn now to the recovery caudal. After a bleeding, or in the slow days of recovery from a fever, the infirmary gave the caudal a warm and comforting drink of spiced ale or wine thickened with egg and sweetened with honey, something between a medicine and a nourishing meal. It was made warm and taken slowly to rebuild the strength of a body drained by illness or by the letting of blood that was then thought to cleanse it, and its warmth and sweetness were a comfort in themselves. Each house had its own way of making it, richer or plainer, according to its means. The caudal belonged to that large and gentle class of remedies that were really careful feeding, the warm and strengthening things given to coax a weakened body back toward health. And it shows again how much of the old medicine was patient nourishment rather than dramatic cure. One pictures the warm cup carried carefully down the infirmary to a patient sitting up at last after the worst of a fever, a small and cheering landmark on the slow road back to strength. We turn now to a gentler kind of draught for the restless and the sleepless sick, worn out with pain or fever yet unable to find rest. The infirmary kept a mild sleeping draught in which the old soporific herbs, the poppy and the wild lettuce among them, were steeped and sweetened and given, carefully and in small amounts, to ease a suffering patient into sleep. The wild lettuce, whose milky juice was thought to bring a gentle drowsiness, was the milder of the two, and where the poppy was too strong or too dear, the lettuce alone might be reached for. The infirmary measured such draughts with great care, for he knew their strength. The care taken with these sleeping remedies, always given sparingly and always watched, speaks well of the monks who used them, for they understood that the very power that eased a sufferer into rest could do harm if used without knowledge. Gentleness and caution went hand in hand. There is a fittingness in finding, near the close of this chapter of loss, a remedy meant simply to bring sleep to the suffering, for sleep was reckoned among the greatest of healers, then as now. We turn now to the last of the infirmary's remedies tonight. For a heart sunk in sadness and a spirit worn thin, the infirmary made a cordial julep of borage and bugloss, those two rough, blue-flowered herbs that the old books loved for exactly this. The bright flowers and green leaves were steeped into a sweetened drink, sometimes with a little wine, and given to lift and gladden a heavy heart, for it was an old and firm belief that borage drove away sorrow and made the sad merry again. The flowers were even floated fresh on the cup, or candied and kept, small stars of blue for the comfort of the low in spirit, that the monks should treat sadness itself as a real sickness to be eased with a gentle, cheering cordial is of a piece with the whole tenderness of their medicine, which cared for the troubled heart as readily as the fevered body. With that blue and comforting cup, we close the chapter of the broken infirmary books, mourning quietly all that was lost with them, and grateful for the little that came through. Let us turn now to the last of the great monastic remedies, the guarded elixirs of the later cloisters, kept secret behind locked doors. Before we open this last chapter of remedies, let us rest a moment on the herbs themselves and on the long, patient work of gathering and keeping them that stood behind every recipe we have read tonight. A book of remedies is useless without the plants it names, and so behind every infirmary and every still room lay the year's slow round of harvest. The gathering of each herb at its proper season and its proper hour, the flowers in their brief flowering, the leaves at their fullest green, the roots dug in autumn when the plant's strength had drawn back down into the earth. Nothing could be hurried, for each plant kept its own calendar, and a herb gathered at the wrong time was thought to be a herb half wasted. Once gathered, the herbs had to be dried and kept, and every house of any size had its drying loft, or its airy upper room, where the harvest was hung, bunch upon fragrant bunch, from the beams, turning slowly brown and brittle in the moving air, filling the whole space with a mingled scent of 100 plants. The dried herbs were then rubbed from their stalks and stored in labelled jars and linen bags against the long winter, when nothing green could be found, and the whole year's healing depended on what had been laid by in the warm months. A well-stocked herb store was a kind of wealth, a hedge against the certain sicknesses of the cold season. There is a deep and homely peace in imagining that work, the summer gathering in the early light, the loft slowly filling with hanging bundles, the winter afternoon spent stripping dried leaves into waiting jars, the whole slow turning of the year folded into the shelves of a herb store. It was work that could not be done in a hurry or done ahead, but only kept up faithfully, season after season, so that the cupboard was never quite empty when the need came. And it is worth remembering that this, too, was a kind of knowledge that had to be kept alive, not on any page, but in the hands and the memory, the knowing of which plant to gather where, and when, how to dry it, how long it would keep, how to tell the good harvest from the poor. That knowledge lived alongside the books and was quite as fragile, and where it was lost, the finest recipe in the world became so many useless words. Let that fragrant, patient round of the harvest settle in your mind now, the drying loft and the filling jars, and let us turn to the last of the monastic remedies. The 14th chapter brings us to the later cloisters, and to the fragrant, potent cordials they made and guarded jealously, the elixirs and distilled waters whose recipes were among the most closely kept secrets of their houses. By this age the monastic still had reached a high art, and certain communities became famous for a single great cordial, a blend of many dozens of herbs steeped in spirit, made to a recipe known only to a few of the brothers, and written in a manuscript kept under lock and key. When the religious houses of France were dissolved in the great upheaval of the Revolution, and the monks driven out, more than one such recipe was carried away in secret, hidden for years, and made again only long after, when the storm had passed. Let us read a few of the remedies of these guarded still rooms. The first and grandest is the elixir of long life, the name given to more than one of these great cordials, a dark and aromatic spirit in which scores of herbs, roots, barks, and flowers were steeped and blended into a single potent whole. It was taken by the smallest of measures, a few drops in water or on a lump of sugar, as a comfort for a weak stomach, a reviver of a faint spirit, and, as its hopeful name declared, a strengthener and prolonger of life itself. The exact herbs were a secret, and part of the cordial's fame lay in the very mystery of its making. There is a gentle irony in a remedy called the elixir of long life being itself so nearly lost, its secret recipe carried out of a burning age in hiding, and only just preserved, and it stands as a fitting emblem of this whole chapter, of knowledge that survived by being guarded closely and carried carefully through danger. That such cordials are still made today, to recipes descended from those secret manuscripts, is one of the happier survivals of our long night, a living thread reaching back unbroken into the monastic still rooms. We turn now to the balm water. Balm, the lemon-scented herb also called melissa, was the heart of one of the best loved of all the convent waters, a calming, cheering, cordial water distilled from its fragrant leaves. It was given above all to comfort the heart and steady the nerves, for balm was held, from ancient times, to gladden the spirit and drive away sadness and unquiet, and a spoonful of the sweet water was reached for in any faintness or agitation. Convents became famous for their balm waters, made to careful recipes and prized far beyond the cloister walls. The old belief that balm made the heart merry and the mind serene ran through book after book across the centuries, and whether or not it did all that was claimed. The sweet lemon scent of the water must have been a comfort in itself to a troubled soul. That so calming a remedy should come down to us from the convent still is fitting on a night meant for rest, and one might almost imagine its gentle, lemony sweetness settling the mind toward sleep. We turn now to the Angelica. Angelica, a tall and stately herb of the still room garden, was among the most valued of the cloister's medicinal plants, its thick aromatic root and its green stems both put to use. The root, warming and pungent, was steeped into cordials and waters given for the chest and the stomach, and, in fearful times of plague, taken in the hope that it might guard against contagion, so that it stood at the heart of many a famous plague water. The green stems were candied into a sweet and fragrant confection that was itself a gentle medicine for the digestion. Angelica's very name, with its suggestion of the angelic, marked the high regard in which it was held, a plant reckoned almost a heavenly gift against sickness, and it kept an honored place in the monastic still through all its long history. The candied green stems, sweet and faintly medicinal, are perhaps the last living trace of that old regard, a small pleasure now whose roots reach back to the plague waters of the cloister. We turn now to the hyssop. Hyssop, a low aromatic shrub with spikes of blue flowers, held a special place in the religious houses, for it is named in the Psalms as a herb of cleansing, and the monks who sang those psalms daily grew it in their gardens, with that sacred echo in mind. As a plain medicine, it was given above all for the chest, a warm infusion of it taken to loosen a stubborn cough and ease a tight and rattling breath, and its clean, slightly bitter scent was thought to cleanse and freshen the close air of a room. Sacred herb and chest remedy at once, it sat easily in the monastic hand. Once again we meet a plant in which the holy and the healing were bound together, grown for the psalm it appeared in as much as for the cough it eased, and once again the monks saw no division in that. The herb that cleansed in the sacred song also cleansed the labouring chest. That the same low blue, flowered shrub served the choir and the infirmary alike is a small perfect image of monastic medicine, in which nothing was ever only one thing. We turn now to the aniseed. Aniseed, the small sweet seed of a feathery herb, was among the pleasantest of the still room's medicines, its warm licorice, like sweetness, making it a welcome remedy in an age of bitter draughts. It was given above all for the stomach and the wind, a warm infusion of the bruised seed, taken to settle a griping belly and to ease the trapped and painful wind that followed a heavy meal, and it was folded, too, into sweet cordials and comfits and taken simply to sweeten the breath. Gentle and pleasant, it was a medicine even children took gladly. The comfit, makers of a later age, coating aniseed in hard sugar, were the direct heirs of the monastic stillroom, and the sweet seed comfits handed round after a feast carried, unknown to those who ate them, a long medicinal history. With the sweet warmth of aniseed, we near the close of the guarded stillroom, and one gentle bitter remains. We turn now to the last of the Cloisters cordials. For a weak and failing appetite, and a digestion grown slow and heavy, the stillroom kept a bitter cordial of gentian root and dried orange peel, steeped in wine or spirit into a clear, bracing, bitter tonic. A small glass of it, taken before a meal, was thought to wake a sluggish appetite and rouse a tired digestion. The sharp bitterness of the gentian roused and softened by the fragrant orange peel. It belonged to the same old tradition as the bitter wine of the very first book of the night, the belief that bitterness itself could stir and strengthen a flagging body. So the night comes round, near its close to where it began, with a bitter cordial to wake the appetite, first in the ancient book of Lorsch, and now in the guarded still of a later cloister. The same simple wisdom carried down the whole long span between. We close the stillroom now, and its locked cupboards, and turn at last to the barest survivals of all, to the single leaves and scraped pages that came closest of everything to being lost forever. Before we turn to these last, frailest survivals, let us rest a moment on all the hands that carried the books this far. For a manuscript that has lasted 1,000 years has passed through a very long line of keepers, and we are only the latest of them. Think of a single old book, and of all the eyes that have looked on its pages between the scribe who made it and ourselves tonight, the monk who first copied it, and the brothers who read it after him, the infirmary who consulted it, worn and stained, over a sick man's bed, the later hand that mended its binding, and the one that recopied a faded leaf, the stranger who saved it from a fire, or carried it out of a falling house, or bought it from a cart of discarded books, and did not know quite why he kept it. On and on the line runs. Through centuries we can barely picture, each keeper holding the book for a while and passing it on, most of them never knowing the names of those before or after. All of them links in a chain that stretches unbroken from a candlelit desk in a vanished monastery to this very hour. Not one of those links could be spared. Break any one of them, in any one of those centuries, and the book would have ended there, and we would never have known it had existed at all. That the chain held, through so many hands and so many dangers, is the quiet miracle behind every page we have turned tonight. And it is worth remembering that we too are now part of that line, simply by reading, by remembering for a while, by caring that these small kindnesses were nearly lost and were not. The books do not need us as they once needed their keepers, for they are safe now in their libraries, copied and photographed, and read by careful scholars. But something is still handed on, even so, in the mere act of attention, in a mind somewhere in the dark, turning gently over the thought of a monk grinding a root to powder, or a nun writing a remedy in the margin of a psalm, so that for one more night the long, patient care that made these things is felt and honored by someone. There is a great and settling peace in feeling oneself, however lightly, a part of that long line. One more quiet keeper in a chain that reaches back 1,000 years and more. You need do nothing, and keep nothing, and remember nothing. It is enough simply to have listened. Let that long procession of patient hands settle softly in your mind now, reaching back into the dark, and let us turn to the very last of the remedies, the ones that came closest of all to being lost. The 15th and last chapter is unlike all the others, for it is not a book at all, but a gathering of scraps, the barest survivals, the single leaves and half, scraped pages and charred fragments that came closer than anything else tonight to being lost forever, and yet were not. When a book perished, now, and then a single leaf of it lived on, cut out and used to strengthen the spine of another volume, or pasted down inside a cover, or simply slipped between the pages of something else and forgotten. And sometimes a page was scraped nearly clean of its old writing, so the costly parchment could be used again, yet the ghost of the older words remained, faint beneath the new, to be coaxed back into legibility long ages after by patient and loving eyes. From such fragments, tonight's last remedies are gathered, each one a survivor by a thread. Let us read them softly, for they are the frailest things on our desk. The first is a wound salve of yarrow, recovered from beneath the writing of a later hand, for the leaf that held it had been scraped and used again, its first words nearly erased. Under the newer text, faint but readable to a careful eye, lay an older recipe for a salve of yarrow, that feathery white, flowered herb of the meadow long trusted above almost all others for wounds. The bruised leaves, the old fragment tells, were pounded and laid on a cut, or a gash, to staunch the flow of blood and draw the edges clean, and a wash of the steeped herb was used on sores that would not close. So valued was yarrow for the hurts of battle that it carried, for centuries, the name of the soldier's woundwort. There is something deeply moving in a remedy recovered from beneath the very writing that was meant to replace it, an older kindness surfacing faintly through a newer page, refusing quite to be erased. The scribe who scraped the leaf could not know that his own ink would one day be read past, to find the herb, lore he had thought to cover over. That we can read it at all is owed to patient scholars of a later age, who learned to see the fainter, older words beneath the new, and so gave back a remedy that had been all but rubbed away. We turn now to the coltsfoot. The second is a cough syrup of coltsfoot, reed from a leaf whose edge is burned black, a survivor of some fire that took the rest of its book. Coltsfoot, whose bright yellow flowers open on bare stems before its leaves unfold, was among the most trusted of all the chest herbs, so bound to that single use that its old name meant, in effect, the cough plant. The flowers and leaves were simmered with honey into a soothing syrup for a hard and tickling cough, or the dried leaf was burned and its smoke gently drawn in, an old remedy for a tight and laboring chest. The scorched fragment preserves the recipe just past the reach of the flames, to hold in the mind's eye, a page brown and brittle at one edge where the fire stopped, and to find the remedy still hold just beyond the burn, is to feel very keenly how narrow the escape so often was. An inch more of flame, and this small kindness would have been gone, that the fire took the rest and spared this leaf is pure chance. And yet it is on such chances that almost everything we have depends, A sobering and a humbling thought as the candle burns low. We turn now to the tansy. The third is a fever drink of tansy, saved on a leaf that was cut from its own book and used to bind another, folded around the pages of some ledger or account, and so carried, unregarded, down the centuries. Tansy, a tall herb with flat clusters of hard yellow buttons and a sharp, bitter scent, was given in a carefully measured infusion for fevers and for the worms that troubled children, and its strewn leaves kept flies and moths from a room and from stored meat. The leaf that preserves the recipe served for 400 years, merely to strengthen the cover of a book that no one now remembers, quietly keeping its own hidden gift all the while. There is a quiet humor, almost, in a remedy surviving, because it was thought worth nothing but the toughness of its parchment, pressed into use as a mere wrapping, while the words it carried waited, patient and unrayed, for someone at last to unfold it. Countless such leaves must have served and perished unnoticed, and it is only the rare one, recognized and gently lifted from its binding, that gives its long-held secret back. We turn now to the eyebright. The fourth is an eye, water of eyebright, found written on the blank end leaf of another book entirely, jotted there in an idle or a careful hand by some long-ago owner who wished to keep it near. Eyebright, a small plant of the grassy places with white flowers marked, as if with a tiny bright eye, was trusted above all, as its name declares, for the eyes, its steeped and strained infusion dropped, cooled, onto tired, sore, and dimming eyes to clear and comfort them. So firm was its old reputation that it was reached for whenever the sight grew weak or the eyes grew weary. And the little note on the end leaf kept the remedy ready to hand. These jottings on the blank leaves of books are among the most human survivals of all, the small practical notes that ordinary people set down in the one durable place they owned, a book, so that a useful thing might not be forgotten. Through such idle notes, more than one remedy outlived the books that were meant to hold it. That a stranger's hurried note, made only to remember a helpful thing, should reach across the centuries to us, is a gentle reminder that these remedies were living knowledge, jotted and shared and kept close, not merely locked in grand volumes. We turn now to the self-heal. The fifth is a salve of self-heal, preserved in the margin of a psalter, written small beside the sacred words by some monk or nun who found the two worth keeping together. Self-heal, a low plant of the meadow and the wayside with dense purple flower heads, carried its whole reputation in its name, a herb so trusted for wounds and hurts that people said it healed of itself. The bruised leaves were laid on cuts and sores, and a wash or gargle of the steeped herb was used for a sore mouth and throat, and it was a favorite, too, of the old carpenters and laborers for the small wounds of their trade. In the quiet margin of a book of Psalms, the remedy waited, kept safe by the holiness of the pages around it. That so many of these fragments survive in the margins and blank spaces of sacred books is no accident, for a psalter or a gospel was cherished and kept when a mere book of physic might be discarded, and a remedy written beside the holy words shared in their protection. The sacred page was, in the end, one of the safest homes a small cure could find. There is a fitting gentleness in a herb called self-heal being saved by the shelter of a book of prayer, the two kinds of healing, of the body and of the soul, keeping one another company down the long years. We turn now to the last remedy of the night. The sixth and final remedy is the softest of all, and a fitting one to end upon, a recipe for a sleep pillow found on a single surviving leaf, in which sweet dried herbs were sewn into a small cloth pillow to be slipped beneath the head at night to bring gentle rest. Rose petals for sweetness, lavender for calm, and the papery cones of the hop for their drowsy, settling scent were dried and mingled, and stitched into the little pillow, and it was laid beneath the ordinary one, so that its fragrance rose softly through the night to ease the sleeper toward rest. It is the plainest of remedies, no draught to measure, no salve to spread, only a small sweet, scented pillow and the quiet it invites. That the very last of our 100 remedies, gathered from the frailest of all our fragments, should be simply a means to gentle sleep, feels like a kindness offered across the centuries to this exact hour of our night. The monk or the good wife who wrote it down could not have known who would one day read it, only that whoever did might, like them, need help toward rest. And so we lay the last fragment down, the little sleep pillow with it, and let the whole long gathering of remedies settle quietly into the dark around us. We have come a very long way tonight, through a great many books, and it is time now to let them all rest. We began with the oldest of them, the book that argued so gently that to heal is a kindness. And we have moved from it, through the garden drawn in red ink, and the young monk's little poem, through the rhyming herbs learned by heart, and the simples of the school beside the sea, through the medicines carried over the sea to a mountain abbey, and the herbal that walked through fire, through the Old English Leechbook, and the 9 herbs against the poison, through the giant book that went away to war, and the oldest painted herbal in the world, through the broken infirmary leaves, and the guarded cordials of the cloister, and at last through the barest scraps and scraped pages that came so close to being lost, and were not. 100 small remedies, and behind every one of them a book, and behind every book a patient hand, and behind every hand the same quiet wish that a good thing should not perish. There is nothing in any of it to remember. The remedies are safe now, kept in their libraries, read again by careful eyes, no longer depending on you or me to carry them. You may let every one of them go. Let the books close, one by one, on their shelves. Let the candle at the end of the long desk burn down to its last soft glow. Let the cold scriptorium and the warm infirmary and the little garden by the cloister wall all grow dim and quiet and far away. Let the day you have had fall away with them. Let your shoulders soften, and your jaw and your hands. Let each slow breath carry you a little further from the waking world, down toward the deep and easy dark, where nothing at all is required of you. If your eyes have already closed somewhere among the herbs, that was always exactly the point, and there is nothing you have missed and nothing left to do. Sleep well. The Quiet Apothecary will be back soon, with another quiet chapter, another shelf of old books and gentle remedies, whenever you wish to return. For now, there is only the low, steady dark, and the last of the candlelight fading softly to nothing, and the whole of a long night ahead of you, unhurried, undisturbed, and entirely your own. Rest now, all is well, and all is quiet, and the old books will keep until morning.